Good evening, everybody. This, hi Stuart. This is the meeting of the Economic Planning and Housing Policy Committee. I've got some administration points to run through, and as we have a couple of new officers in the room, I'm going to run through the full gambit. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Please do not leave the War Memorial Park. We've all signed in and we need to be checked off. Please note this meeting is being webcast live. Confirmed. Thank you. And can I house all members and any of the public and officers to switch their phones off or turn them to silent. That better apply to me as well. Right. Moving on to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Harvey.
Note from Councillor Wooldridge, you'll be 5 minutes late, literally coming up from the station.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm substituting for Councillor Leake.
Thank you. And I'm also aware that Councillor Beerman is substituting for Councillor Honorary Cubitt, and he may well be a little late, but he is notified that he'll be in this evening. Are there any declarations of interest on items on the agenda? Councillor Harvey.
In relation to the local plan, anything to do with SIL, because obviously it's related to the local plan, although it isn't on the agenda this evening, I will declare I have a personal interest in Park Farm in Oakley. As far as any other personal interests are concerned, they're null and void at the moment, and I'll inform standards and yourselves if they come live again in the future, but at the moment that's the only one I'm aware of, and it's a personal interest.
Thank you, Councillor. Urgent matters, no urgent matters have been pointed my way, so we'll look at the appointment of Vice Chairman. Are there any nominations for the appointment of Vice Chairman to this committee? Then the Vice Chair position remains vacant. This will be called at each meeting of this committee. Minutes of the committee meeting held on the 10th of July 2014. Before I open it up, I've got one adjustment. It's an omission on the minutes. Apologies for absence and substitutions. The Labour group was omitted from it. I got your apology for that meeting. That will be amended by the committee services staff. Apart from that, is there any other comment on the minutes? Thank you. The minutes accepted. I can sign them. Oh, I'll sign them a bit later, but they're accepted. Thank you. We go to the first paper. Could I ask the adoption of public spaces, full council motion? Got to call Councillor Tilbury to the chair, please, as he was the mover of that motion in full council. If you'd like to take a seat. And I believe Richard Wareham, you want to give a brief on this, or Councillor Raphael? Fine. Councillor Raphael. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This comes out of the motion from full council. There is a full answer within the paper. I have put my own comments at the back end of it. I dare say Councillor Tilbury may say something about them, and that's what I wanted to say in paragraph 8.1 and 8.2 and 8.3. And so the committee's comments will be incorporated into a report to Cabinet setting out a way forward. Thank you. And maybe, Mr. Wareham, do you want to say anything? No. That I am pretty deaf in this ear for reasons that I don't need to go into, and this one is so-so. So just see how we go.
Councillor Tilbury, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Fell and the officers for producing this paper. It's I think it's been quite a journey for us all with this one. So, the first thing I would say on there is it's on Part A on there, I was talking about new developments designed to avoid creating areas of land that would create a future liability. It didn't just mean that in the fact that we would create lands, but it's one of the issues, well, certainly at Foxton, there's lots of very small areas of land that are of no use to nobody, and this was one of the issues that with Foxton, particularly the officers were reluctant to take it over at that time because they were, what's the public benefit in these bits of land that were not much bigger than this table sort of thing. There were lots of areas like that which don't actually take long to mow, but we don't want that. But that was part of the problem, the sort of piecemeal way the open space was put together, and in many cases it could have been incorporated into someone's garden or amalgamated, or it could have been designed out. So I think that's not been appreciated there. I didn't realise that till I read through it earlier there. I think on some of the other bits there, one of the other issues that came up with it as well is that obviously we talk very much, if you go to page 9 of 11, the conclusions there, it's very much talking about basically people buying these properties, but of course on Foxdown, the ones in Overton, at 30% affordable, so 30% of the people on that site are housing association, either tenants or shared ownership. And obviously with newer sites, we can have 40% on there. Now what's come up when we've had these land companies, the management companies, the only people who are able to become involved with the management company are the homeowners, because the other people with the other shareholders are the housing association. And in some cases, sometimes the shared ownership ones are allowed to become shareholders. So there's a bit of confusion there of, what democratic representation is there from the residents when the 40% of the residents can be excluded from these bodies. So I think that needs to be addressed there, the way we can deal with that. But, certainly on our own land, we can do something, but obviously you appreciate with private land, but the truth is that this is sort of unknown and all that happens. And of course, one of the things that came out of this very clearly certainly with Foxton is that the housing association residents were paying more in service charges than the homeowners were, because the housing association were whacking their own, so they were actually charging for the privilege of administering the administration charge. So instead of the homeowners were paying £200 a year, they were paying 260. And of course, if they're on benefits, who's actually paying that? It's a bit of a scam, really. And the other thing briefly is, which again really only applies to Foxton, it was to do with the disposal of land provided with a subsidy. Well, the idea of the subsidy at Foxton was to provide these green benefits, things like the rainwater harvest and the solar panels. And we never, when this came about originally, the idea was that we would go back in a year or so's time to see how well it worked. Well, if we'd have done that, a lot of the problems we'd had at Foxton would have come out of that time. The fact the solar panels didn't actually work very well because they'd not been installed properly. Well, that's actually now been corrected. They've actually tipped them up at a steep angle so they actually face the sun. And would you believe it, they're getting hot water out of them now. And that's the sort of thing, we provide a subsidy to do these things. The builder messed it up basically, but the homeowners just assumed that it was right, and it only sort of came out, it literally came out of one phone call from a lady who had a leaking roof, basically, and it's quite interesting. But we never went back on that, and part of that was the issues around Foxton. It was going to be sold to one company, then another, and it sort of drifted, I think, there. But we never at the end of it went back and said, well, we've given a subsidy of £1 million to provide green benefits. Did they actually provide a benefit? And I think that's something that could be addressed. But yeah, other than that, I think I've covered just about everything there, and I think everything else is covered in the report. But I think all we want to do is make sure that we can try and minimise this sort of thing going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. Now, is there any comment from the officer on that? Right, any members would like to ask Councillor Tilbury any questions? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Ian, you mentioned that some of the patches of land that you've referred to could be suitable for perhaps supplying to individual residents' curtilage. Has any applications in that direction been made to the authority or to the owners of the land?
As far as I'm aware, no, that's not something they've looked at yet. I mean, there's still, what's basically come out of that, one of the issues that came out of this is that because the council owned Foxton, there was a Section 106 agreement that said the developer was responsible for this land in perpetuity, which I looked at and said, as far as I'm concerned, they're responsible for this. And that's gone through, and as a result of enforcement action by the borough, to enforce this now, then, because David Wilson owns, we're going to try and offload it onto the residents through this Foxstone Overton Management Limited company, and the officers have said, well, actually, no, they can't do that. They're still responsible. They've got to come up with something better than this. And so they're still arguing over that at the moment. So that's not actually been resolved. But what it just suggests that the service charges they've levied for the last 5 years are totally illegal. Well, that'll be an interesting one when that comes out. That's quite a lot of money, isn't it? But again, that's a bit of an oddity because we own the land there. But I think that the issue around odd bits of land there, I mean, that's the thing that should be resolved at that stage. If it's right next to someone's house and adjoins it, it would make sense to add it on there rather than the trouble is as well, it's not just the management companies. In some cases, the housing association own odd little bits of land, which they're also charging for the grass cutting on. So, you've got this sort of mosaic of strange ownerships, and and as I think I said at the original one, if we have 3 lots of people going to cut the grass, the borough cuts the grass that we own, the housing association cuts their grass, and this management company is cutting the grass for everyone, and it's obviously economically it makes no sense whatsoever.
Thank you for the answer, Councillor Tilbury. Now, I'd like to make a comment immediately on what you said, that some of the members here might be aware that CP is actually addressing or trying to start to address some of these issues. I'm involved in that process as well, as a member of CP, of trying to rationalise who does what around the borough and who provides the services to that. So hopefully that will help to contribute to straighten these things out in the future. Could I ask the officers, is this David Wilson Holmes issue being addressed within the borough? There was a legal mention there.
Yes, is the simple answer. We have been asked to provide, we have sought legal advice on the various options that are available to us, and at an officer level, and obviously they will be discussed subject to what comes out of this evening's meeting, and then shared with the portfolio holder, and will inform any response made up to council in response to this motion.
And before I get my ears bent, probably, could I ask that the ward members are involved in this, because I think any of these things that are going on affect the ward members because they are trying to look after their residents. On an information basis, I don't care what the relationship is, but I think the ward members need to be kept up to date with the progress of these things. Okay, Councillor Mr. James.
Thank you. Ian, I just want to understand how many people in Overton are affected by this, and how much money are they paying? And percentage-wise, has that gone up from when they first bought the house? So I was looking at what the cabinet member said, and they're aware of this. And I just wonder, what that percentage is now as opposed to what it was when they first bought those properties.
Well, certainly with Foxton, it's one estate of 75 properties, which are, I say, 30% affordable, basically, so it's spread across them. So, I mean, as far as I'm aware, that's the only one that I'm aware of. It's the sort of thing you only ever saw in leasehold flats before, but from what I can gather, the charges in the early years were quite low, and they've progressively gone up. And there's also a particular oddity on there. They built some of the houses below the line of the sewer. So there's a few properties that are numbered with a little mini sewage pumping station, which costs them hundreds of pounds a year on top of this, which they have to pay for, which it's sort of, you could argue they were aware of it when they bought it. But it's, again, that's just bad design. It's, you build a site on a hill and you have to pump the sewage uphill to go downhill again. I mean, I've never come across that anyway. Usually only if you build a housing estate in a hole in the ground, a depression, you could expect that sort of thing on a very steep hill. It's
How much they pay?
At the moment, I think I think it's about £200 a year for the private owners this year. I think it went down very slightly this year, what I can gather. But I think at the moment, a lot of them are refusing to pay it, so it's caused a bit of a rebellion. But the housing association ones pay an additional £60 to the housing association to cut their little bits of grass, and to the cost of administering the other charge, because they charge for the cost of administering the charge, because they do it for the whole of those properties, because they are technically the owner of those properties. The tenants are only tenants, so they just get charged for all this.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. Oh, we've got next. Councillor Pierce, if you'd like to come to the chair. And you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing I need to say is I'm incredibly disappointed on behalf of the residents of Highfields to read what we can't do rather than what we can do in this report. The issue that they have at some 290 homes where they may well have known when they bought the property that there was going to be a management charge or a service charge is not helped by the cavalier way in which both the builders, that's Barratt's, and the various management companies have conducted themselves since people moved in. Worse still, there are a number of houses, I think 15, who didn't have this in their deeds when they were originally sold, so they don't have to pay anything. So the others are picking up the tab for that. What is also disappointing is that we're looking like we're impotent, that we can't do anything about this for people that come and live in this area, in the whole town. We want people to come and live here. That's what everybody keeps telling me. And it's not possible for us to say we will put a condition on and risk being taken to court. The building company, Barratt's, say that they think the council imposes these conditions on the developer under Section 106 in order to grant planning permission. And that's what they're telling the residents. It's not them that said we don't want to pay the commuted charge. It's us here at Basingstoke and Dean who are saying to them that's how they've got to do it. It's a double charge, it's double taxation. They're paying full council tax and they're not getting the complete benefit. I know the argument, having lived through Fairs Fair in London, I know the argument is that they may not use many other services, but that really isn't the point. It's an equated charge across every property in the borough, and therefore they should get the same service as anybody else. So if we are impotent and unable to exert our authority over builders and developers, then it seems to me that we should do the honourable thing and offer a discount on their council tax so that they're not any worse off than any other person who doesn't have to pay that. Just quickly, yeah, I've got a bit of time, reference to section 4.1 paragraph S on page 5 of 11. Interestingly, the localism agenda emphasises a move away from green spaces being transferred to the local authority and highlights a push toward community-led management. Now, community-led management is very, very different from a developer making money from a management company managing the landscape on any particular development. And I think we might have a different approach if it really was community-led management. We might very well improve areas, bring them back up to scratch as we're doing in Buckskin, so that the local people are saying, get them up to standard and we'll manage them. So I would, sorry, I hadn't, did you want to interrupt? No. It's 49 seconds, but I think I can finish before then, Chair. I think that the whole issue of community-led management is a good one and one that we ought to pursue. There are lots of organisations that do it, rather than allowing the developers to make money out of people who are being charged an extra tax. So if we are impotent and the officers are saying that there's nothing we can do and we're not prepared to be brave and say no to the developers, then the very least we can do is offer those people that purchase those properties a discount on their council tax. I've done.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. If you'd like to sit there a second. Again, before I ask members if there are any questions, Councillor Laura James, I note your request. Officers, there's some first mentions in there of the council can't do anything, the entering into legal agreements through S106. Do you have any comment to make, please?
I just want to comment about the this particular site at Highfields. There is a I suppose I was going to refer to it as a get-out clause. That's quite the phrase, but there's a clause in that particular 106 agreement that does allow the council to secure that open space if the developer fails to perform to a certain standard. And Councillor Pearce, I know you're familiar with that. Clearly, we are continuing to monitor how well or how badly, however you look at that, the developer behaves in terms of his maintenance responsibilities. And clearly, if he were to fail to perform, then we do have that opportunity within the agreement to seek to take possession of that open space and to recover a quite considerable commuted sum. That is written within the 106 agreement, which is a public document. I do believe it's on our website, so there is that opportunity for us. I was equally interested in your comment about community-led management, because I too am a supporter of community-led management, and yes, it does work well elsewhere. It's quite new, I would say that, and I think we touched on that in the paper. But equally, the community-led group that would ultimately manage these spaces would, when these spaces are established, want to have something that allows them to fund that, and they would be in a very similar position to the council in that they would be looking to secure a commuted sum or dowry of some sort, which would allow them to maintain those spaces in future. So it is an option. It's something which at the moment is quite new. We only have one, I believe, operating in Basingstoke, and we're keen, and that's relatively new. So we would like to understand how that develops, perhaps before committing to further community-led type schemes, but it's something which we wouldn't be adverse to going forward.
Yes, you can.
I'm fascinated about the fail to perform. I mean, Barrett's and their management company have failed to perform consistently badly, rather consistently, for the last 3 years. One gentleman had to wait nearly 9 months to have a damaged bush removed from the back of his garage, I think it was. So, you know, yes, there's a get out clause, so why haven't we got out?
The fail to perform clause covers specifically identified spaces within the 106 agreement. It's about defined spaces. It may be the area you're talking to, and I don't know the detail clearly, but it may be the area you're talking to is outside of that which is identified as being open space. The get out clause relates to the open space identified within the 106 agreement and the plan that's attached to it there. I can only assume that the area you're talking to isn't covered by that, but I'll happily share that perhaps outside of this, because it does say it's not necessarily associated purely with this issue.
Well, it certainly was part of the declared space, because the management company would never have done it.
Councillor Pearce, can I make a suggestion? It's obvious that Mr. Wareham is fully aware of that area. Possibly you could get together offline, and he's got the tools in the office to actually find out exactly where the space was to assist you in this. Members, Councillor Mrs. James first, Councillor Parker afterwards.
Thank you. Could I ask you, of the 290 people that are affected, what did they start off paying and what are they paying now? You know, what percentage? And is there anything that's written down, if you can't answer it doesn't matter, but is there anything written down to say that it has to be a certain sum, or can it just keep increasing, or is there a limit to what they can put on?
My in-depth knowledge is not that extensive, but I believe that there can be ways of limiting it. The simple fact is, on Highfields it hasn't been, and it went up by some couple of 100% between, I think, year 1 and 2, or year 2 and 3. They don't know at the beginning of the year what the total charge will be. There's always an adjustment at the end of the year, which could be anything from £10 to £150. £420 the year before last. The previous year was, I think, just over 200. They've got a new management company in now. They wanted to form a residents association, but most of them are so hacked off that they're not going to do that.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Nigel. I just need to drill down a little on that cost. Are you saying your suggestion is that the figure that these households are paying is £420 a year?
No, I'm not suggesting it. It is. It was. It varies. I mean, again, offline, I can show you some papers. If you don't have a recognised residents association, the management company and the developer don't have any cause to speak to the residents. So in order for anything to change, they have to form a residents association. It has to be a recognised residents association, and then they can go into discussions with the developer and the management company. What has happened so far is that none of that has happened, even after a public meeting with Barrett's, who have one of their managers living on the patch. They still didn't change what they'd already done. They even charged one chap £60 for being half a week late with his payment because they had to send 2 letters out. They're unscrupulous people. Barrett's, OM, these management companies. They're not anything like the salt of the earth they should be.
Councillor Parker.
Yes, I'm sorry, Nigel, I wasn't challenging you. I was just trying to help understanding of the real nub of the thing, which is the true cost. And if you are bringing to us this specific issue on an estate, it would be good for the committee to really understand what figure, because divide by 12, you know, we have a better understanding of what we're actually being asked to make some comment on. So I would go back again. Are we talking 2013-14 year? Do you believe that, or you know, they are paying £420 a year?
I don't know what the charge 2014-15 is, but last year it rose to just over £400.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pearce. Officers, could I ask that maybe that could be a particular case in Basingstoke, and you've noted that? Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Members, there's no real questions to officers on this time. We're requesting on this paper your comments and inputs into the responses by the portfolio holder into this paper, so that he can then examine those and then progress this paper past this committee. Any members with any input? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Having spoken to the residents of Highfields with colleagues, first-hand experience of their frustration, their anger, and to be honest with you, quite a lot of their inability to find the money in the first place to pay it. It's happening not just there. I think there are other examples across the town of estates that have been built where these issues are now becoming prevalent, simply because of the way that the Section 106 is finally agreed, and the way that those legal agreements are then applied, and the way that we've gone about it historically. And that isn't to blame anybody, that is the reality of what we're facing. The point is, how then do we deal with it now? Because this is an issue that's presenting now, and the residents have been facing it for a considerable period of time. A couple of points to raise, I think, is the significant rise in charging that's taking place. It is not as if these companies are operating to a regime whereby they have a standard increase or an inflationary increase. They are doing this of their own volition, regardless of any relation to any cost or any particular scheme. And the example of Highfields is a good one. You know, having a 100% increase for the sake of what the management company deems is the right charge to charge is something that is totally unacceptable. And I think the residents find it. The residents individually fighting that is then a problem, because one-on-one they get picked off, one-on-one they get threatening letters, one-on-one they get £60 charges when they don't pay it because they're trying to do something about it themselves. So there's an issue of collective action here on the estates and how we as an authority can support our residents, which is part of this. The impact on residents isn't just in terms of the charging, it's also all the standards. It's not as if these companies actually do a good job in the first place. Interesting experience in Norden recently with one of the very same company that Nigel's dealing with on Highfields in Regent's Court, and trying to get them to deal with trees that are on their side of the fence, and being told, oh, it's such a small contract, we can't deal with it with our people, we've got to go out to tender, and the tender's too much. And 6 months later, we're still banging our head against a brick wall with the management company responsible for the upkeep of that estate, because they can't get their act together, but they're quite happy to charge those residents a service charge for what they're doing, or what they should be doing. So again, it's not just on new estates, this is historic across the town. Developers' approach and how they're going about this, the developers don't deal with this, you wouldn't expect them to. They're farming it out to management companies. So that is where the real issue is, because it's the development company that signs the Section 106 agreement, but it's post that they then bring in the management company that is the problem in the significant portion of this. So in terms of, okay, we can't do anything in law, is there something voluntarily, protocols that we can get? There must be something we can do that creates a standard that we would encourage and want them to sign up to and to work to, even if it isn't directly enforceable. We can't just let it go. In terms of the issue across services not being delivered, if there's a willingness on the part of the residents to want the land handed back to the borough, and if there's a willingness on the part of the developer to hand the land back to the borough, I would be interested to understand what the mechanisms would be such that we could then take the land back. Is it a case of having to have the commuted sum? Is it a case of having to have legal agreements? How do we go about actually making the process workable so that the land can be handed back if that is what all the parties want? And if it's a case that the residents want it and the developer won't hand it back, can we intercede in those circumstances? If there's a desire amongst the residents to want the land handed back to the council, they're living there, they're paying the charge, and the developer is the problem. There's something we can do around that? I guess what I'm saying in all of this is it can't carry on the way it is because of the way these residents are suffering. And it isn't just, and it isn't right. And we as the planning authority, as the local authority, surely have a responsibility to try and do something. So pushing the envelope here with officers and the portfolio holder, where can we go on this? Because we can't allow it to carry on, I don't think, in the way it is.
Certainly, Councillor Felt. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. A minute. I'm just trying to see where in the paper that your observations could be rolled into it. I think it's on page 5 of 11. On the section, can the council insist on the adoption and transfer of green spaces? One of your points comes into there. The other point is at the bottom of the same page, is the council able to impose controls on the service charges made by developers. Now the words in there, those 2 points are the main important points that you've made, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but do any of the words in there that have been produced for this paper give you any assurance, or do you want them reinforced? That's the kind of comment we would like to feed back to the portfolio holder. Just before we come back on that, Councillor Raphael, you wanted the microphone.
Just wanted to say, in response to what Councillor Harvey said, I made some inquiries behind the scenes on some of the things you'd said. The difficulty, as he knows and we know, is that a voluntary protocol, if it isn't enforceable, then it can be ignored. And if it is not something that can be attached as a planning condition, then planning permission cannot be refused if they refuse to accept it. And so that's the sort of nub of the problem. If only something different could come out of that, whereby we could say, well, we expect this to happen and it's a planning condition that you abide by it. I sketched out an alternative, which was that they would have to abide by a protocol that if the residents thought that the amount was too high, they could petition the borough council, and the council could determine if the amount was too high, and then they'd have to agree to it, thinking that we would be a relevant ombudsman for them. And that was determined to be something that couldn't be enforced as a planning condition. So it's ultimately, planning issues have to be looked at through the planning telescope, and that's the problem we've got. I don't feel as though we've got to the end of the road of ideas, but I do feel that some of these ones that we're trying to sketch out have probably been answered already with a unfortunately no. And there must be a better way through it, and I'm quite happy to keep looking.
I think the secret in all this is the ideas such as the ones you've come up with, yes, and it looks like some of them have already been explored. The trouble is we're bumping up into legislation, and it's a tricky one, I know. Are there any other members like inputs into this paper? Right, Councillor Parker, followed by Councillor James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I obviously didn't appreciate that we weren't able to seek some sort of clarification on a couple of points from the officer. So I'll try and incorporate that in comment.
Hang on a second. What points were they? Because if they can't produce any responses now, I would ask them to have a look afterwards and feed them back to you and the members of this committee after the meeting.
Sorry, I thought you said that we were going into comments straight away, as opposed to perhaps asking the officer for clarification at this meeting.
Okay, the officer is quite happy to take clarification. If it can be relevant to parts of the document, I would be very grateful, because that assists the portfolio holder to move this thing on in the future. If it's a new item, well, let's see, if it's relevant to what we're talking about, go right ahead.
Just something that came to me through reading the paper, Chair, was an identification of the sums of money involved. In terms of we enter into these complicated negotiations and voluntary agreements, commuted sums of money for future maintenance, transferring over ownership. I can't find here any sort of indication of what sums of money are involved. We can identify, I would suggest, through the detail in the report. There's evidently a lot of officer time cost involved here, and sometimes you rather think, well, what are we arguing about in terms of this? My observation as a ward member, when we have a resident contact you and say, we haven't had the grass bank cut, you start to enter into this world of everyone trying to pass the parcel of ownership, and we get officers presenting to us land survey maps showing pink strips and blue strips and yellow strips, and this bit belonged to the housing association, that bit still is in the ownership of the developer, and we enter this sort of game. And so the officer time involved here is quite incredible. Whereas all people want is, in a lot of instances, is a mower passed across the grass verges between the curbside and the pavement. And are we putting a lot of energy and effort in a point of principle? So, and then what I wanted to ask was, this money that we have received, or we're hoping to receive, when we agree transfer of ownership with a commuted payment, is that ring-fenced?
The commuted sum, if I can try and answer it in a slightly different way, but where the council takes ownership of the open space, it is transferred to the council. In many cases, this is what happens. The council receives the freehold of the land and receives with that a commuted sum, which is calculated based on the future cost of maintaining that space. That is what happens. That sum of money comes into the council, and yes, it is ring-fenced for the future maintenance of that space. We cannot use it to spend on something else. It's for that. So I think the answer to your question is yes, it is, Councillor.
Councillor Mr. James.
Can I just ask a question then before I go on to my comments? Richard, in relation to developers opting for not going into transfer of their lands, would we ever get to a point, or could we get to a point where we're going to see this across the whole of the town, and there'll be very little that we will actually control, and there'll be different companies controlling different aspects of the development across the whole of the town? This seems to be where this is going at the moment. It seems to be a move in this direction by developers to opt out.
I think we need to bring this back in terms of, we're talking about two developments here. I realise that clearly in those areas of importance to the people that live in the street. These are two developments where we seem to have these issues. The majority of sites, this council secures secures the open space through the 106 agreement. So hence that's why we have such a large asset of open space. We received the land, we received it in 99% of cases, dare I say. We have these two developments, relatively recent developments, whereby in both cases the developer wished not to offer the space to us for adoption, chose himself to retain those spaces. I don't know the developer's motive for doing that. My assumption, and what I've tried to explain in the report, is that it is quite likely it's a cost issue. Some of these commuted sums involved are large. For example, I've dealt with one today of best part of £250,000, so they're large sums of money, which clearly the developer can retain the space himself, meet the cost of maintaining that space himself, rather than pay the borough council a large commuted sum and hand over the freehold. Is it a trend? Well, certainly I'd say it's only two developments, and they are both relatively recent, in the last 7-8 years or so, from when the agreements were signed. So I don't think it's a trend that all developers move into, but certainly in Barrett's case and David Wilson Homes, we have both of them operating elsewhere in the borough, and they haven't chosen to take this approach. They've taken what we call the normal approach. So there's clearly on those two developments specific reasons why they've chosen to take this approach, but I don't know what they are, I'm afraid, and I guess only those two developers would know what the motives are.
The reality is, though, that there are lots of these sites across the town. I mean, we've got them in Brighton Hill, we've got them in Norden. You know, I know of many sites where there is a management company that is maintaining these areas. So, you know, it isn't just those two. And I suppose what concerns me is when we started to look at this issue some time back, I approached the head of planning to ask, how many sites are there? Do you know how many sites there are? And he didn't know. And in a sense, I think what we need to do as a borough is to map what we're talking about, how many of them are out there, and have some idea of the charging. Because in canvassing in Brighton Hill recently, there was lots of concerns about the management company and what they were being charged, and they felt they couldn't cope with that charge, and they were feeling very vulnerable to that management company. So I don't think it's unique. In Norden we have problems because they don't do the work, and so I think there is an issue, and I think we need to, as a borough, understand how many developments are impacted by this, and then once we know that, really to understand what they're paying. For someone in Highfields to be paying over £400 is an enormous amount of money to be paying on top of your council tax. And they're quite often young families, and it's a massive added cost. We've very proudly said that we've not put up council tax, but effectively these people are having to pay additional money for services in this town. But it's a hidden cost, and we're almost, none of us are talking about it, but effectively many people in the town are paying additional money for services that are being delivered. And I think we need to understand that, and I don't think any of us do understand what's out there and what's being done. And the head of planning said once they get planning permission, in a sense, he doesn't know then what happens next, in relation to the management company. And the other thing that happens is, and I think it was happening in Overton and in Buckskin, is that management companies change. So a management company will come in, and then that's handed on to someone else, and it just moves on. And you can see several management companies, and it just spirals that cost out of control. And I think that we need to have some way of scrutinising or understanding what these people are paying. And I like the idea that you talk about, Councillor Ruffle, in relation to us, being able to understand that. And there's some way that they can come to us as a council to bring their concerns. And maybe we need to be able to hear what residents are saying about this charge. So I think we need to explore that. And the other one is in relation to some of these developers. Paul talked about a protocol. I think that it may not be enforceable, but we could have a protocol of good practice, and that we would expect this of a good developer. And what we would do in lots of other aspects of the work of the town is to actually promote developers and say, you are a good developer, we're going to reward you or we're going to recognise you in the town. So it's not saying, you know, it's not a stick. It's actually saying, well done, Wilson Homes, for what you've done. You're amazing. Thank you. You are a good developer in this town. It may be then look at in relation to any future development. Did you want?
If you're winding up, because I'm going to respond directly to your concerns.
So, you know, that's what I'd like to say. And the other one is, I'm concerned, and have been examples in Highfields where people can't pay. What happens? And my concern is, do they pay this, or do they pay their rent or their mortgage, and are they vulnerable? And we need to understand, you know, in relation to the cost of living at the moment and all of the impact and pressure on people, what happens if they can't pay or they are struggling to pay, and what are they, if they're paying this, what are they not paying, or are they getting themselves into greater debt? I know that we're looking at in another overview at debt, but you know, are they using payday lenders, or are they borrowing to pay this money? So it is a concern. I'll leave it at that then, Chair.
The last few comments you made, yes, there are a concern. They're a concern to everybody in this borough, to every councillor. We all live in areas where we do have depredation of vulnerable people. However, what we're looking at is one of the possible causes of it. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm working together with 2 members of your group on the CEP on trying to identify where the problems might lie, because that's the first thing you've got to do. Somebody mentioned go to the root of the problem. We're trying to identify primarily in the town, but it's going to expand with the new developments coming down. So we have to look at the borough, not just the town. We want to identify what areas of these open space, who carries the responsibility of maintaining that open space. We can only start with the status quo. We can't really pedal backwards. If we can, then that's something we will investigate. But to try and put some of your concerns not to one side, but they're being addressed. And I think if what Councillor Raffaella has heard tonight assists him in the particular areas that I've pointed out, and others within the paper, we'll start to get somewhere in the process that we're doing within the Communities and Partnerships Committee. I'm just giving you what's happening. There's nothing to come back on, really.
You're very angry, Chair. But what the work that you're doing within the other portfolio, within the other overview, is to look at neighbourhoods and the concerns that in relation to the maintenance of neighbourhoods. What I was saying is we need to map what people are paying and who is paying, and so it's a different issue completely. This is about, in relation to developments, those that don't have 106 and opt out, and how many developments are there in the town, how many are affected, and then what we need to do is then look at what they're paying. It's a different issue. I'm not asking, this isn't about the standard of the work that's being done and the maintenance of the work. This is about money, and it's a very different issue to what you're looking at in the other overview, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I tried to clarify my points. If someone else down on the line, on the list first, I just wanted to make my comments, but I give way to...
Councillor Bierman.
It's good to hear.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, you changed names? It's a good name to try. Thanks, Chair. Firstly, my apologies for late arrivals. I think you might know I've substituted at last minute for for Councillor Cubitt, whose daughter is not very well at the moment. But I just wanted to throw in what is linked with this. I know it's not 100% this paper, but it's such a linked topic that if the portfolio is going to look into these charges for open spaces and the like, I think that should embrace a little bit more. It should be done as a package, and I think you're aware of what I experienced when we were on a site visit once, which was where the developer made it plain that he wasn't even going to adopt the roads or the street lights. Now, I'm not talking about a little enclosure here of 5 dwellings, as has traditionally been the case for non-adoption. This is something much broader. And if we're going to have a situation where there aren't even street lights being provided. In fact, there were, in this particular development of 9 new houses and 1 existing, there are going to be no street lights. And it isn't Old Basing, otherwise they'd be happy. But and if some the residents later feel that street lights are necessary, they have to go in at their expense, and then they have to pay for the maintenance, and yet they'll be paying the same sort of council tax as the rest of us who are getting that provision from the county. And I think at some stage we have to be in a position to say, no more of this. Now, I don't know what the legalities are, but I think it's appalling that this is all being shipped off to private companies or residents groups who then, as has already been said by Councillor James, will change and all the rest of it. I think it's a big issue, and I think we need to nip it in the bud before it gets any further.
Thank you, Councillor Behrman. The portfolio holder would like to make some comment.
Just drawing up what was said just before Councillor Behrman, I'll certainly discuss what he's raised with the officers and see whether it ties in or not. It's quite a fresh thought, so I think we just need to reflect on it. But in relation to what's been said so far about protocols and them being voluntary, I think there's certainly a bit more thought that can be given to that, and I'm going to give it more thought with the officers. We've had a short natter, and we'll see where we get to.
Councillor Parker or Councillor Peach? Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, while we're sitting and listening to this, and I think it is quite concerning when you hear sums of money have gone up from sort of £200 to £400. But actually, what ideas can we put into the mix to try and mitigate this, perhaps in future? The obvious one that struck out would be designing out those sort of little leftover spaces, because I'm sure you do this work anyway, but nonetheless, it sounds like from hearing from, I think it was Councillor Tilbury that mentioned these little pockets of land. So, I mean, by looking at that in the very beginning, if we can make sure we design out these pieces of land in the first place so that they fall into a land that we're going to take back ownership of, or if they're roads, that perhaps the roads, if possible, can be designed in a way that obviously the council can adopt them, because sometimes you have a piece of road that is designed that maybe the refuse vehicles can't turn in it, for example, so you won't adopt it, but the developer will maintain that, and therefore any of those residents that perhaps use that piece of road may incur a higher service charge than the other residents. So that the idea that obviously the obvious concept of that, trying to design it out in the first place. If that can't happen, I just wanted to ask the question, is if you was mentioning commuted sums sounds a bit like a potential blocking point, and that from a very simplistic point of view, I'm thinking, do we have an option not to take the commuted sum on the assumption that we have gained a new house with a new resident paying a new set of council tax, and therefore could that therefore pay for the maintenance in future? So are we able to do that? And the third option is if we're snookered on absolutely every aspect possible. I know there is always the concept of buyer beware, and that's why we have solicitors who are meant to do these sort of searches and advise us. But if we know that there's going to be a piece of land that's not going to be adopted and will be a service charge, do we have just some sort of purchase guidance note for people looking to buy houses? It may not be about covering this one specific item, but it might just be to help people for a first-time buyer, just to think about a few things to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Peach. Councillor Parker.
It always pays off, doesn't it, really, to be courteous? Because Councillor Peach has really crystallised the point I was trying to raise initially with the officer. What are we chasing after here? Because you can imagine in some of these instances, on some of these other estates, can you see the guy in the tractor with his cutting equipment behind, saying, well, we can do day number 12 to 37, but I have to skip number 43. At what cost and at what officer cost in chasing after all these arrangements? But for purposes of, I think, things that need to be noted, Chair, and I thank Councillor Peach for his lucidity on that particular point and making it so succinct. Why bother? Let's get on with the job, accept the responsibility, and get the thing done. Because this is, £35 a month here. And a note that I just made is, when you look at what is fair and what is right, no sector of our community should be disadvantaged against the others. And this is, no doubt, a double charge. And we spent many years, when I first became a councillor, looking at the parish precept and where there was an element of double charge, and we found a way to resolve that. So I hope we look at this with the same amount of enthusiasm in regard to this, because there's no doubt about it, in my view. Maintenance and management charges by these developers are now a cash cow increasing income revenue for them. This is how it's seen, and often for the end consumer, it's high cost for poor value. And so anything that the portfolio holder can do that takes away this disadvantage, when I look at the report and when you think about all the negotiations that are going on, we're the local authority, we do it anyway for everybody else, let's take this issue away.
I can't but agree with you. I've noted the portfolio holder has been doing a lot of nodding on all the points that have been made this evening, and he's taken it. We'll do a summation in a minute. Are there any more comments for the portfolio holder? Councillor Harvey, followed by Councillor Watts. Councillor Watts.
Thank you. I just noticed at the beginning we said we had no planning obligations to stop this happening, but I heard Councillor Tilbury say that Foxdown was owned by the borough. With a clarification on that. If it was borough land, we obviously entered into those negotiations to sell the land off to developers who induced these charges onto the residents of Foxdown. I'd like to ask that question, answer that question.
That sort of response to that whole issue about where the council was the landowner prior to development, yes, certainly applied in Foxdown, didn't in the Highfields case, but certainly did in Foxdown. Obviously, there are two aspects to it from the council's perspective. We are the local planning authority. We deal with that development application as a planning authority, but equally we deal with it prior to that as a effectively a property owner, and us selling the land to that developer. Clearly, within that contract of sale, there will be various covenants which we as a council insist on, which we seek to secure or within that land transfer. But of course, these covenants which we introduce do impact on sale of that land, value of that land as and when it's sold. So there is a danger that if we over strengthen covenants, that we may not receive the value of land, the market value of the land. So that's something we just need to bear in mind. That is touched on in the paper. I was just trying to find a section where it was talked about, but it is covered in the paper, councillors.
I mean, that's morally wrong, isn't it? So we should charge the residents of Overton to get pick up the costs basically of the money that we don't get from selling the land off. I think that's wrong. And if the borough does own that particular land, we as an authority can put those planning restrictions on that actually happening. So that's something we can do, and something I would hope the portfolio holder would look at. And carrying on from the debate as well, I agree, if there's a will, there's a way. I mean, this council spent lots of time looking at as Councillor Parker had said, the double taxation in the parished areas. We came to a conclusion there that was unfair. I would like to see a sort of an audit and see how wide scale this is across the borough, and look at the scale of the charges, as £420 a month is an awful lot to charge to get your grass cut, and you know, I'd like to make that comparisons with other areas as well. I'd like a full audit of what's actually happening, and I believe in the NPPF. It's reviewed every year. I think we should actually write to the government and point this anomaly out, that we have our hands tied and this is what's happening, because I think this double taxation is appalling, quite frankly.
First of all, from a personal point of view, I totally agree with you. Now, I would have to go back to the officer on that. What I was trying to infer, to go back to Councillor James's points, was as we were doing this who owns what and does what in responsibility, that's precisely a point that we can identify who is the responsibility and then go to them, because we're planning to have, as your own group members might have told you, to get these housing associations, whomever, into the council to identify what they got. That's a work in progress on another committee.
Chair, but like I said to you, I'm very aware of what you're doing, very aware, but that it's a very different piece of work. This, as Councillor Watts has said, this is an audit of who's paying what and what development. It's not in relation to what work is being done. This is something very different, and you mustn't confuse the pieces of work. They're very different pieces of work.
Thank you for that reminder, Councillor James. Now, any more points? We got Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to pick up the point about the costs that are involved here, just for the record. I think it's important we just get a scale of this. And Councillor Pearce has given me this information relating to Highfields. In 11-12, the charges varied on the site from between £150 to £234. So it wasn't as if there was even a consistent charge across the site. In 12-13, they increased to £190 to £398 across the site. In 13-14, they went up from 270 to 440 in some cases. And in one particular case, the significant rise was 63% in 1 year, from £269 to £440.16. So these are some of the sums that we're dealing with in the reality that people are facing. And I don't think, again, what everybody has said, but in terms of the sums in answering Councillor Parker's points, this is the volume of money that we're talking about that people are being charged with.
Could I ask the members of the Labour group through to Councillor Pearce if he could actually email those to Mr. Wareham, so that there's some empirical evidence that they can work on? That would be very useful. Councillor Musson.
Thanks, Chair. I think I wrote to the officer anyway, but I'm not sure, so I'll repeat here. One of the things I think we could do is to, with all our knowledge and expertise, write down what residents could do, what action they can take, for two areas. One is, I quite often get this in Tadley, there's a little strew of land somewhere, like Councillor Tilby mentioned. Nobody knows who owns it. The residents are complaining about the maintenance of it, and Basingstoke and perhaps Hampshire say, well, it's not ours. And the resident says to me, well, what on earth can I do? And so it's a lot easier, I think, if we could have something from the relevant department in the council, which we could give to the resident, or help us to explain to the resident the sort of things they possibly could do. And as somebody mentioned, in terms of the management charges, I heard tonight that they can form resident associations. Perhaps if we could explain all of the different courses of action that you could take. Residents probably know some of it already, but I'm sure there's lots of residents that don't. So I think if we could furnish the members and the relevant departments in the council with this basic information, points in law, etc., that would make it a lot easier, and I think it would be a nice service that we could give to residents. Look, sorry we can't help, but this is some of the things that you could try to do. Thank you.
Like a guidance pamphlet, something like that. Yeah, very useful. And the other advantage I think that would bring is consistency across the borough, because we all live in different communities and we've all got these little issues. But I think that would be a general guideline across to everybody. Would that be possible, Mr. Wareham? Not a long document, we're talking about a bunch of bullet points.
I think it's something we look at. I wouldn't give any commitment that we would do it, but certainly it's something we could look at, yes.
As long as you could possibly have a look at it and address it. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Parker. going to wrap this up in a minute because I just want to make a summation. We've got some other work to do tonight.
Interestingly, I expect if you were to pitch a tent on that site, you soon find out who the owner is.
Indeed. Now, I will ask Councillor Raffel, have you made enough note of these observations? Do I need the committee services to go through them for you and the members? Bullet points? We're just going to enumerate the kind of points that we've made this evening that are going to be passed to the portfolio holder to augment his information on this paper.
Obviously, these are coming from a non-technical point of view. I'm not a technical officer. Just looking at 5 main points we've got here is, can we produce guidance notes for residents of the borough? And that's when purchasing, that's something Councillor Peach raised, when purchasing properties. And again, that's kind of similar to this idea of a guidance pamphlet, writing down what actions residents can take, particularly residents' associations and how effective they can be. Are we able to stop commuted sums? That's something wording-wise I'll have to look into with either Councillor Peach or Councillor Raffel. And designing out leftover spaces, is this a possibility from the get-go in terms of that? And what is the scale of these charges, and can an audit be done on that issue?
I think that covers it. Happy that those now be included in passing across to the portfolio holder. Councillor Mrs. James.
Can we also have the issue of the protocol in relation to recognising
Indeed.
good
Yes.
practice?
Yes. Councillor Parker.
I think it was mentioned from the floor, and also I think endorsed a couple of times, was the suggestion that during the time we can't resolve the issue, we should be looking at a consideration of a reduction in rates for those people paying that double charge.
Yes, that will certainly be looked into. Thank you. We will move on to the next topic. Certainly.
I just want to say that's been very helpful, and although 9.2 indicates a particular trajectory for what might happen, I'm not particularly keen to take that trajectory soon without having done all of this work. Whether it means we come back here or we don't come back here, I think we just need to do the piece of work first and see where it takes us.
Next thing is paper C. While the officers, new officers get settled, what Councillor Raffel is going to do now is give you all an update on the progress of the comments from the local plan. It's not on the agenda, but it's a good opportunity as we're moving into SIL discussions.
Chairman, today I sent an email to all members with a schedule of proposed amendments to the local plan, which have been looked at and come to a decision on as a result of the consultation. Those of you who've been on this committee for a long time will remember that I said to you that when we came back from consultation, I would, if they were major amendments, bring them back to this committee for discussion. But if they were, in my view, minor amendments, I would give you an opportunity to comment before they were signed off. So this is your opportunity to comment. It's by the 21st of October, so dust down your local plans, work your way through, and I'm hoping there won't be too much, but it starts from the principle it's better to be told now than at a later stage that something isn't quite right. So the email went to you all, and the local plan, it's 21st of September, I need to hear your responses by, and currently we're on target to submit the local plan on the 9th of October. I'm not aiming to get questions from you. I just thought that it would be a good chance just to tell you to bring it to the front of your minds.
Subject is the community infrastructure levy draft charging schedule. Do you want to introduce this or to the officers?
This subject, I was well aware of when I knew it was coming back, and that we had been to consultation. That results that we need to change things, and therefore we will need to go to consultation again once you've commented, I've considered, Cabinet's made a decision, full council's then made a decision. We've got to go out again. So it was clear to me that some of you weren't even on this committee, and therefore hadn't ever understood what SIL is, perhaps. And so the first thing is I wanted a briefing on what SIL was to bring us all back up to speed. Secondly, a briefing on what the consultation brought to the surface and why there are some changes. And thirdly, then obviously to hear your views on it. The thrust of it is that SIL on Many Down and the golf course would not raise sufficient funds, but it would appear from the report by Three Dragons that a Section 106 funds being applied to those sites would bring in much more money, and that seems to be the basis of it. The decision. So, firstly, I'm going to ask you to look at the findings in relation to that Many Down and the golf course viability report, if you have any comments on that. I need to know that you are your views as to the community infrastructure levy draft charging schedule set out in Appendix 4. The draft Regulation 123 list, which is those items that the SIL money would go towards funding, your views on that. And the officers will talk you through perhaps a bit of if there's been some changes from before. The draft instalments policy in Appendix 6. And I ask you to delegate to me, probably on the same basis as before, minor changes. Well, there'll be some notification time like we've just done. Major changes obviously would obviously come back. After the consultation, that is, and that you also endorse the method of the consultation on the various items. If you need any clarity to that, I can go through it again at a later point. Thank you. I've got Mr. Lambert, Mr. Hunter here, who are going to do a double act of some sort. Make the most of Mr. Hunter while we got him.
I'll come to that at the end of this particular paper, but I can ask Mark Lambert to set up the short presentation for you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. As Councillor Miller said, I've got a short presentation just to run through some basics around SIL, because I'm aware, as Councillor Raffel said, that some members are new to the committee, and it's been a while since the committee discussed SIL. It was back in November last year. Just a few points really around SIL. One of the main intentions of SIL that the government has in mind is that it provides greater transparency and certainty for applicants when they're applying for planning permission as to what sort of costs they'll be asked to bear in terms of the provision of infrastructure. It's designed to mainly replace Section 106 agreements, which we're all used to, but it won't replace them in their entirety. We'll probably end up with a system of both SIL and 106. Importantly about SIL, it isn't used to fund affordable housing, but it is used to fund infrastructure generally. And in order to justify taking SIL forward to a future examination, we have to be able to tell the examiner that we've got a funding gap, and therefore SIL is required to help to fill that funding gap. It's notable that SIL won't ever fill the funding gap. It's the funding gap that the IDP's identified is significant, and SIL will only help with a proportion of that. Importantly, SIL isn't negotiable. Once we've got an agreed level and it's been adopted, that is the level that developers will have to pay. Most importantly, when we set our SIL rates, we mustn't impact upon viability. That would be a key test that the examiner will be looking at. And also that after April next year, the ability to use Section 106 agreements will be limited, and we'll only be able to pull 5 different applications from 5 different sites to one piece of infrastructure. So that could have implications in the future as to how we perhaps fund school provision, where you might find quite a few sites contributing to one particular school. So those are just some important points to bear in mind. Just going on to the work we've done so far, members will be aware that last year we undertook a viability assessment of the local plan, and that was used to inform the SIL rates and the affordable housing policy that we included in the plan.
Try to explain what viability means as in land values
Of course.
and developments.
Apologies, yes. When we're talking about viability, we're of course making sure that sites can come forward and that they can provide all the necessary infrastructure without impacting upon the developers' profits and the ability to bring forward the site effectively. If we start imposing too many charges on that, we'll find that sites don't come forward for development because the developer can't afford to do so. Notably in the local plan, we have a policy of 40% affordable housing, and we're not proposing to amend that. So I just wanted to make that clear to members. As Councillor Raffel said, we undertook consultation on the first draft of the charging schedule earlier this year, and we had 39 comments from a range of organisations. The type of comments they were raising were around some of the assumptions we used about build costs, build rates, sales values, and that kind of thing. Really, the technical side of bringing a site forward for development. More recently, we've been undertaking more detailed studies of the larger sites we've allocated in the plan to make sure that we're going to provide infrastructure in the correct way. One of the concerns raised through the consultation from the County Council was that they were worried that the approach we were proposing to take previously for the provision of schools wouldn't provide the necessary funding for school provision. And so we went back to look at this again with a view to looking at the scope to deliver schools through Section 106 agreements rather than SIL, which we'd previously looked at. The updated viability assessment has looked in more detail at things like infrastructure costs, build costs, financing costs associated with development, raising market values and sales values, but it doesn't amend the affordable housing provision that we're seeking. We've really taken this into account in looking at the rates we're proposing for these strategic sites in more detail, and we've also taken the opportunity to look at the buffers that we're required to introduce when implementing SIL. Really, the outcome of the updated viability work is that it's had an impact on the SIL levels that we were proposing to implement. It's brought them all down by varying amounts. In terms of the largest site that we're allocating in the local plan, Manydown, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, this is suggesting that there's difficulties with achieving 40% affordable housing when combined with all the other costs that are associated with that development. So the cost of providing the primary schools, for example, comes to 17 million. And when you factor in all these other costs about the spine road and open space provision, it begins to impact upon the viability of the site. The consultants have therefore suggested that it's going to be difficult to achieve SIL on this site. We've therefore suggested that we have a zero rate. The other main sites we looked at was the golf course site, where it's brought down the costs, it's brought down the SIL charges that we feel we can achieve for that site. The slide there really summarises the position we're in and the recommended SIL levels that are set out in the schedule. So for Manydown, that's a zero rated. For the larger strategic sites where we've got on-site school provision, it's suggesting £65 a square metre. For Tadley and Basingstoke, the urban area, £70, rest of the borough 150, and for care homes and the like, we're suggesting that these should be zero rated. And really that's on the back of all the additional costs that some of these sites will have to bear, which instead of being through SIL, we'll achieve through 106. So the benefit of 106 is it gives us greater certainty that these things will be delivered because the applicant will be legally required to provide them as part of the permission. If they don't provide them, they can't go ahead and implement the permission that may have been granted on that site. So in that sense, 106 gives us greater certainty than SIL. For non-residential schemes, we've also taken the opportunity to reevaluate the rates we were proposing to charge. For supermarkets and out-of-town stores, we're suggesting this should be £150 per square metre. And notably, the other rates come down for the other uses. Just in terms of some other issues associated with SIL, we are required to pass on a proportion of this to the parish area where development takes place. Where that particular parish happens to have a neighbourhood plan, they will receive 25% of the receipts that the Borough Council receives for homes built in that area. And where there is no parish plan, they will only receive 15%. So there's a benefit to communities in bringing forward a neighbourhood plan to benefit from that. We aren't allowed to what's called double dip, and that's to take contributions through 106 and through SIL for the same form of infrastructure. So we've had to carefully think about how we can most benefit from these income streams in future without prejudicing ourselves. There's a Regulation 123 list as a part of the report in Appendix 5, which sets out the type of schemes we intend to fund through SIL. And coming to this committee in October will be a planning obligations SPD that will set out in more detail how we hope to achieve Section 106s in the future. We also have a proposal to accept payment in kind in exceptional circumstances where a developer is able to build something. We may be able to discount that from any SIL bill that they are liable to. And we're also proposing an instalments policy whereby for larger schemes and more significant schemes, you will have a staged payment approach whereby you don't have to pay everything up front from the word go. That's set out in Appendix 6. In moving forward, as Councillor Raffel mentioned, Cabinet will consider SIL at the end of the month, and then that will go on to full council in October, prior to consultation in November, December. I also mentioned that we'd have a planning obligations SPD coming back to this committee in October, where we'll be seeking your views on that. After the consultation, we'll be submitting SIL for examination. We expect to do that in January, and that will subsequently lead on to an examination with an inspector that we anticipate will happen in February, March time. And we would hope that we can have approval and implementation of SIL in the spring. Just a reminder of the recommendation that Councillor Raffel ran through on the slide there for you. I think in particular we're interested in point 3 there, and hearing your views on the charging schedule, the draft Regulation 123 list, and the instalments policy. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I'd like to leave that slide for the reminder of the committee of what we're trying to do this evening. Anything to add, portfolio holder? Right. Members? Yes, Councillor Beam?
I'd just like clarification of what seems to me fairly important point.
I was going to offer you questions for officers. If that's,
yes, that's
what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Beerman and Councillor Musson.
I was listening fairly carefully, and there's ever a very clear presentation from Mr. Lambert, but he said in one breath, these things are not negotiable. Once the rates are fixed, that's it, and all the rest of it. And then a couple of paragraphs later, he's saying, and we're doing a special deal on Many Down and the golf course. And particularly on Many Down, where one might say we have a vested interest, and people can say, hang on, you're charging us heftily for whatever it is, let's say Cufford Farm, if it were to happen, and yet you're sort of giving yourself a free pass. How does that work?
It's really as a result of, instead of taking contributions through SIL for Many Down, for example, we're seeking the provision of the infrastructure on site through 106, so that the developer, rather than paying us SIL, will provide the school rather than us providing it. So we should end up with the same infrastructure from the site, albeit that the provision of that school, for example, will be provided directly by funding going to the county council for the school. It's really a continuation of the current process for Many Down, compared to us taking a SIL charge, then giving us some of the SIL levy to county to provide the school. So you should end up with the same end result, albeit it's just a different mechanism to getting there.
Come back to understand it. It is a different mechanism. So you could have a developer having an imbalance, i.e. If the 106 were to produce a higher payment from the developer to the local authorities jointly, then they might well squeal foul. And I don't know how you can balance the one against the other in a fair way across the board if you've got a mixture. Now, I have to say, I'd understood first when you said you can have a mix, you can have sill, or we'd have sill across the board, and sometimes some 106. So I'd got the impression, and you perhaps need to correct me, that 106 was an add-on to the sill rather than a possible replacement. And if it's a replacement, I think you can get into some quite complicated calculations to make it fair if you've got two systems working side by side.
I think you will still have them working in tandem, albeit for some things it will be necessary to secure them through 106, like open space. We've heard the discussion just now from the previous paper that some things work effectively in that way, and we can secure those things appropriately and have the control as necessary. But for many down, I think it's probably fair to say we'll be seeking the same provision of infrastructure as set out in the policy and the plan. So the same number of schools on the site, the same level of open space and community centres. It would just be a slightly different mechanism to how we achieve that, I think. Is that answering your question? Have I gone off track there?
Chair, I'm still not sure I fully understand that, because I'm not sure why, if it's going to produce the same, why we're not working under the same umbrella. But perhaps rather than dwell on it forever, perhaps I need to seek a little tuition on the matter at another stage, or perhaps others might wish to, because I'm struggling.
Can I input a layman's turn on this? You should have a paper in front of you that was produced for tonight that was Introduction to SIL. You've got that. You should be.
Yeah, I've just got the papers as I walked in, so I haven't got through them all.
That was for guidance for members, just because we all needed to get refreshed on what SIL was. If I could interpret that possibly is that if you wanted to go to Manydown and you impose SIL, that's so much per square metre for the houses that they plan to go on to Manydown. That will not produce the required sums to provide the infrastructure on Manydown. Therefore, you go to S106, which is a negotiated legal agreement to achieve that particular amount of funding to implement the infrastructure required for Manydown. That's how I hear it, and I'm getting some nods from the officers. If you want to expand on Councillor Byrne, please go forward, because I like to keep it simple if I can.
I think the key point about using Section 106 is it's where we want to be absolutely convinced and sure that we can deliver the infrastructure on the site. Whereas SIL, you're collecting across the piece, and you have to then put all that money together to pay for a school, let's say. So on the very big sites where you've got some very key infrastructure, so most of the sites where we've got Section 106 as a combination, it's where we're delivering a school, for instance, you want to be absolutely convinced that that will be provided. And if you just use SIL, which is what we were doing before, there was a great concern, particularly from the County Council, that we may not have got that delivery for the particular site through that process. So this is why we've got this kind of hybrid approach where you've got zero rated SIL, which means that you use Section 106 to get the infrastructure, and that essentially sits on the very key sites, particularly ones where they've got school provision.
Thank you. That was very helpful, Chair, and thank you. Just one query though. Of course, if you're doing it traditionally 106 method, you're getting your money a lot later, aren't you? So doesn't that pose a problem? Because if you're going to provide the infrastructure, and that's one of our problems quite often traditionally with 106 has been that sort of it's 20 years before the infrastructure is finished. So might that not be perpetuated in the system you just mentioned?
Simply as we do with Section 106 now, it would be all negotiated, so you'd have triggers in your agreement as to when things were provided. That would be the same as we've done in the past, and well, your view, not mine, but I think effectively we would try and make sure that the infrastructure that was required came on at the right time through that agreement.
Very briefly, I understand, Councillor Parker, you want to on that point?
It's just that through the introduction by the officer, I'm certain I heard him say that one of the issues with Section 106 funding would be that of pooling, and that there wouldn't be the ability to amass sufficient sums of money. And if we're talking about provision of schooling, another issue through the report implies that on large sites delivered over a long period of time, monies may not come together at the right time. This seems to me not to sit quite so well with what we're being told in regard to this renegotiated treatment of from the response from Hampshire County Council for provision of funding of schooling.
Who would like to take that?
Just in terms of the Section 106 agreement for a site, as you rightly say, you can't have more than 5 obligations, so 5 Section 106 is contributing to the same thing. So where you're talking about on-site, a particular site, you're likely to be dealing with one Section 106 agreement. The problem comes as to when you start saying, well, we want to use Section 106 to expand, let's say, a particular primary school, and you've used 4 of those up, and then the next development comes along, and then that uses the final slot of money. It gives the final bit of pooling, and then you get the next development that also needs to do it, but it wouldn't be able to do that. So SIL enables you to provide for expansion and extra places, whereas what we're saying here is Section 106 would be more useful in terms of providing an actual new school, if you see what I mean. So SIL you'd used in a pooled method to expand existing schools, and in our approach, the Section 106 would essentially provide your site with a school through Section 106. Does that helps?
Okay, but we're not going to stay here very much longer. Councillor James.
It was just on when you talked about the phasing in relation to 106. What would happen in relation to SIL if there was phasing? Would the money be there to start with? Compare the two.
There's if you look at Appendix 6, there's a proposed instalments policy there which sets out how we would expect to receive payment for different types of site depending how much money was involved. So you'll see as the site gets larger, we would expect money to come in over a longer period. But effectively the difference between 106 is that it's triggered by the 200th house, say. SIL is triggered by number of days from commencement. So as soon as the development commences, the clock's ticking, and we would expect to receive SIL income, from that date onwards.
So just picking up on that point, in relation to the concerns that we had about Rooksdown, where they didn't build the last house, so they didn't have to pay the 106. If we'd had SIL, we, as a borough, we may have got the infrastructure. So effectively, as a landowner on Manydown, could we do the same? I just want to be clear.
The issue is, though, it's whether there's enough SIL in the pot to provide that school. If there isn't the money available, then obviously we can't provide that school when it's required. So that is the issue with SIL. It will take a while to get the SIL income starting to come through to us, and so we may not have 10 million in the SIL pot straight away to provide that school as and when it's required. That's where we go back to 106, because 106 will be legally binding on the applicant or the owner of the permission to provide that school when it's actually required, and the county council will be giving us advice as to when that school is needed.
Right, thank you. Councillor Musson.
Thanks, Chair. Question to officers. Before I ask the question, can I assume we're going to be moving on to the points that we want the portfolio to like? Okay. I've got a question for clarification. I understood, and I did ask one of the officers during the week for clarification of this, and I thought I got the answer that the SIL would be funded. Sorry, the SIL would be pulled, and then I noticed, I think it was one of the earlier slides in here, it suggested that only something like 5 projects could be used to fund infrastructure in a particular area. So that seems to conflict with the thought I had, which is that it would be pooled across the whole of Basingstoke indeed.
The five pooling point relates to 106 agreements, so you're only able to pool 5 106s to one particular scheme. You're right, SIL does go across the whole borough, so all developments where there's a SIL charge will contribute to that.
I'm glad you said that, because it relates to the next questions. One of the things I couldn't find when I read through the summary or through the details was how you'd taken account of two things really. One was if we look at a historic funding gap. So if you've got a particular area where there's been a deficit in infrastructure over a period of time, probably because maybe there hasn't been much development taking place there, and if we then match that with a local plan, and the local plan suggests that there's not going to be much development there in the future either, that means that we have predicted a funding gap there that's going to be ongoing. But that doesn't seem to be reflected in this report. Obviously you can't reflect that in the charging scale, because if there's not going to be much development, not going to be much income, but there's a historic funding gap that's acknowledged, and there's not going to be much funding in the future because there's not much development. How's that taken care of, and how's that fixed?
I think that'll be down to the Borough Council. Once we've got SIL in place and we're starting to receive SIL income, the Borough Council will need to decide on its priorities as to where SIL should be funded. And so I think it'll be with members to kind of make that decision as to where they see their priorities across the borough. And if they see a need for infrastructure provision in, say, Tadley, where we know things are a bit more limited, then that's within members' gift to make that call.
I'm just going to ask a very simple question myself. Yes, got you on the list. How long do the SIL rates last? They're fixed, so you've got a schedule. What do you do about inflation? And are they inflation proof? Can they be altered in that regard? Because if we get inflation, then the actual value in real money would start to decrease.
There is a mechanism to take into account inflation, and that relates back to, I think, it's the building cost service. So we're able to inflation-proof them. If, however, we see house prices running wild, or all sorts of things changing with land values, then we are able to undertake a full review of our SIL rates. And if that means, that would mean undertaking a further viability assessment, which we may choose to do. We might want to do that as a good practice every 3 to 5 years, say.
Thank you for that. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that point, my questions are in the context as well of the fact that land values have gone where they've gone recently, and it is interesting to watch the developers have a bun fight like they are having over land. It is incredibly inflated, the prices, which obviously relates to these questions. We've got a situation where Razors Farm, Kennel Farm, they're all outside of SIL. They are part of our list, they're part of our plan, but they're not part of SIL because they've already come through, trying to beat the punch, and whether they'll be the only ones we'll see with time. So I'm assuming that they will be affected by Section 106, but that Section 106 won't reflect our Section 123 list. It will only affect those sites consuming their own smoke in the context of the existing rules. So where do we stand with the pooling of those resources in the context of the infrastructure needs in those communities? And I'm thinking of Chinham, like the Chinham roundabout, and I'm thinking of Kempshott, like the Kempshott roundabout, when we have such significant pieces of infrastructure that will be required, but the sites in question aren't going to be there to pay for it in that context. Where do I see the overlap between what we've allowed to go through and what's gone through, and where you're trying to drive this SIL agenda now?
The key date to work to is April 2015, so it's not that far away, and that is when the pooling issue comes into play. So beyond that date, we can only pool 5 obligations to one particular scheme. If we haven't got SIL in place by that stage, we're going to have to be very careful about the way we word our 106 agreements, so they're very specific. So rather than saying we take contributions towards BESS, the transport scheme, the strategy, will be very specific about, it'll be this junction, we'll name the junction in the agreement to try and get around that. Equally for schools, we might find ourselves saying we need a new school classroom at Four Lanes Primary School, for example, and try to narrow it down as best we can.
So, I mean, just so I've got my head around it, so those Section 106 agreements are going to be useless because they are historic and they have no relevance to our Section 123 list of any kind, really. And I understand that. Points about many down, really.
Councillor Harvey, I think Mark would like to come back on that one.
I think really the 1, 2, 3 list only comes into play once we've got SIL in place. So until that time, it's just a draft document.
But the infrastructure needs are the infrastructure needs of the community, no matter what, and that's the point. Forgive me, Chair. In terms of the report from Three Dragons, fascinating series of assumptions, some of which I agree with, most of which I'd like to question. Not here and now, but I do question them. Depends a significant amount in terms of how we dispose of Bennydown. Is it dealt with as one homogeneous site, or is it split up? Is it sold off? Is it kept in public ownership? Our entire approach there will govern all of these issues, I think. So my question then relates to the list on page 86 of 192. I would love to know how we've got to £17 million for 2 primary schools, because in my head, £17 million for 2 primary schools, in other developments I know of, you're talking roughly on average £5 million for a new primary school at the kind of form entry we'll be looking at. Now that on its own equates to £5,000, over £5,000 taken from each unit we're looking to put on Bennydown. That's a huge number, and I don't see where that comes from. The same question applies to bus services. We're all passionate about bus services, I appreciate, but we're going to take £2.2 million, which is roughly 3 times the subsidy we're giving now across the whole of the borough to buses, for a bus service relating to Bennydown. And again, it's how we get to these two, because that all affects the judgment on affordable housing. So I do not believe for one moment that we cannot deliver 40% affordable housing, and I will fight tooth and nail with my colleagues for 40% affordable housing at absolute least on Bennydown. So again, I question the Three Dragons assumptions and invite the officers to, whether now or whether in an email, just to understand where the 17 million comes from, because it doesn't seem to hit reality.
The £17 million comes direct from the Education Authority. They say that's the cost of providing 2 schools, a 3-form entry and a 2-form entry. So that we expect the Education Authority to have experience of these things, and that's not something that we've sought to question. The bus subsidy, I don't have all the figures in front of me, but we sought advice from bus providers over a number of years as to how long we would expect the bus service to be provided, with a set duration and frequency of the bus service. So we feel we've got sound figures we've plugged into the viability assessment, and Three Dragons have done their calculations on the back of that.
I still question that, unless we're going to have gold leaf plated chairs for them to sit on. I mean, 17 million for 2 primary schools. You want the best primary school, I understand that. We don't want a shoddily built school, but you want good quality. But £17 million for 2 primary schools set against what is happening around the country is quite a leap of faith, really. And I don't have it at all. Particularly when you look at the golf course, when it's only going to cost them £7 million to build a primary school on the golf course. I mean, what, 2 different standards there? I mean, what kind of primary school on the golf course? In all of that...
Sorry, Councillor Harvey, I'm not stopping you. I'm just getting a response from the officer.
Yes, okay.
In the case of the golf course, that's just 1 primary school, one 2-form entry. On Bennydown, we've got 2 schools, one's 2-form entry, one's 3-form entry, so that explains the difference there.
Well, if it's a 2-form entry, again, I'd question the 7 million, but we'll come back to that in a different... If we go down the road of not applying SIL, and we go down the road of then selling the site, which I don't want us to do, but say some cabinet member decides we're going to sell it off to private developers and that's the way it's going to go, and we've made a decision not to apply SIL, that to me is dangerous in the context of the site. If we go down the road of Section 106 being specified and maintained in public ownership, then I can see the logic of what you're arguing, because you're specifying Section 106 for public authorities to deliver the project through their chosen developers doing the job. I just appreciate the officer's opinion on what would happen if the circumstances of how we go about disposal of Bennydown changed.
Has absolutely nothing to do with SIL and Section 106, how the land is disposed of. This is a sort of a planning exercise that looks at the viability of a site. So you have to detach those 2 things. What you're looking at is what the scheme is going to cost, how viable it would be, what your charging schedule should be, and then taking that forward. It doesn't really make any difference as to who the landowner is. Every piece of land is treated in the same way in this process, because that's the natural way you have to do it.
No, I hear that, Andrew, but that's exactly what you're not doing, because we're saying zero sill on many down for all the reasons you're arguing, and sill on others for different reasons. I mean, just from that point, I totally appreciate what you're saying and why you're arguing it, but as ever, it's that Chinese wall again. And I'm sorry, but I cannot separate the Chinese wall. We have a responsibility on both sides of that, and it's our duty to be aware of it.
Councillor Wooldridge.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies if this is a basic question. I'm playing catch up on this. I'm new to this committee, and it's a big learning curve, this SIL thing for me today. I'm just looking at the summary sheet, and I just want to understand one thing here. It says SIL is not payable on affordable housing, etc. Does that mean, sorry, maybe in my interpretation of this, does that mean that if affordable housing is built, you don't, SIL isn't charged, or is that so? If 100% affordable housing was built on a site, there'd be no SIL. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mr. James.
So moving on, following on from that, so and I want to understand this in relation to Manydown. If we have zero SIL for Manydown, the argument could be in relation to 106, and it's being made at the moment in relation to the Manydown Overview Committee that Manydown doesn't stack up, and therefore we're not going to be able to deliver the 40% affordable. If we, as a landowner, come up with an argument under viability that it isn't achievable, will we see, and could we see, less than 40% achieved on that side of affordable housing if we're saying it's not viable, and that's what is being said at the moment? Could that happen?
Yeah, if you use section 106 at the moment, you would have a negotiation. You'd be able to have a negotiation as to what you decided your infrastructure was and what your level of affordable housing was. If you used SIL, at the moment we're saying you couldn't make SIL viable with 40% affordable housing. So hence the section 106 enables you to have that negotiation, to enable you to have that discussion about what are your priorities for that site.
Can I also, so what we're told is that there's 141 million is needed for necessary infrastructure provision and 94 million for desirable infrastructure. Last year it was 197 million. What's changed? Is one of my, I've got follow on from that. That's my first question.
Yes, we've had some updated figures in terms of costs going up. Equally, we've had some successful funding announcements from the LEP where some of our schemes have been funded. So some of the junction improvements that the County Council are taking forward have now been struck off that IDP funding gap list. So some things have gone up, some things have gone down, but we're left with a balance of 141, as you say, for the necessary infrastructure we feel we need to provide.
And if, like Paul said, there are major sites that have come forward and only paying 106 and not paying into this pool because they come forward earlier than was expected, and if we as a landowner also don't pay into this pool, what will that deficit be? So if we are not contributing as to the development, I understand the arguments for 106 for ourselves in relation to Manydown, but how does that impact on the rest of the town in relation to the infrastructure that is needed?
In some ways, it shouldn't make any difference at all, because whilst you're not taking income through SIL to provide something, you're actually getting that income provided, that facility provided direct through 106. So the end result should be the same. It would just be the mechanism again that's different, as explained to Councillor Bierman.
But sorry, but what I was meaning, so in relation to the Kempshop roundabout, if we're not paying into the pot, and I know it doesn't relate to Manydown maybe, or it doesn't, further down the road, what is the impact on the infrastructure in the rest of the town if we are not to pay into SIL?
That would need to be paid for either through SIL or through other funding arrangements where we would continue to make bids as we have done to the LEP recently.
So, and how much were we going to make in SIL for infrastructure to be put into that pot? What was the amount of money? How do we determine that?
I couldn't tell you offhand, I'm afraid.
Okay. And the other question that I wanted to ask is in relation to the list that we've come up with, which is on page. You've noted it before. One of the appendices. Where does that list come from? So in relation to 124, who determined that list? Is that the list that we worked on?
That's the Regulation 123 list, and that's the list of projects that we intend to use SIL money to fund. That's a list that's been devised by officers in consultation with other bodies like the Education Authority and the Highways Authority to make sure that we direct our resources to the most appropriate things. Yeah, and it also reflects the approach in the IDP. Yeah.
Are we, sorry, if we was to do this route, would we be challengeable by another developer because self-interest, effectively, would it, could we be challenged for taking this approach on our own land and not taking it on another site elsewhere?
No, I don't think we could. I think the viability assessment that we've undertaken plugs in all the assumptions about land costs and infrastructure costs, so it's been done in a transparent manner. If you look at other other local plans coming forward and their approach to SIL, you'll find that many of them with strategic sites have a zero rate and they're providing the infrastructure through 106. So this isn't an uncommon approach. It's quite typical of the way things are taken forward, and that's because of the certainty that 106 provides.
Councillor Peach.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I've been pulling all my bits out my pages, so I'm afraid I can't reference to where I was talking from. Right, so I'm just asking random order now. I've lost my plot, but anyway, basically, I want to know are there any items that Section 106 could never fund that still could provide for, and by default, could we miss out on crucial infrastructure if we went down that road?
I'm not sure I can think of any types of infrastructure that 106 couldn't provide, but we do have the issue of the pooling that's creeping up on us. So at some stage, we need to be careful we don't get caught out by that.
But just for clarity purpose, so oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, so from a legal point of view, the Section 1 is entirely up for negotiation, obviously based on needs, but you can pretty much factor in what you need into that. There's nothing that's going to restrict you.
Yeah, there was the restriction around pooling, and also a point that my colleague just made is that SIL is helpful in some respects, and you're able to take from a huge number of sites and then contribute to a more significant scheme, say a significant junction improvement, for example. You can take from all applications that are appropriate.
Okay, and I think it was Appendix 6, but this refers to the stage payments, and I wondered if, I know the maximum number of days was about 500 and something, but I'm just wondering, is there a risk of stage payments that a contractor enters a project, pays part, builds phase 1, pulls out or goes bust, and then would a successor contractor take on the remaining commitment at the same agreed rate, or would they be able to renegotiate again?
No, as SIL will be set and non-negotiable, they'll be obliged to pay that same rate and continue to pay that rate in line with the instalments policy. And if they default, then we will pursue that as we would through a 106 agreement at present.
Can I come back? I dig out my post-it note. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. When this came to committee last year, I was concerned that the SIL was used on figures from 2012, 2013, and house prices and land values were going to increase. I just wonder what benchmarking we've actually done since, because we're using 213 data. What increases have we actually forecast into our SIL for the next 3 to 4 years?
When the viability assessment was updated over the course of the summer, the consultants took into account the most recent land house price sales rates taken from the valuation office. So we've got us up to, the figures are as up to date as they can be. Although we can't make assumptions about where they may go in the future, and that's an important part of SIL. They have to be based on the current value.
It's more of a statement that SIL is potentially flawed. It could be losing this borough millions of pounds if land values increase and we're not reacting fast enough. You know, you said we can review it every 3 to 4 years, but land values can increase rapidly, and we're losing valuable money to fill up the infrastructure deficit which we have. I think it's flawed. The whole scheme is flawed. I think 106 is far more flexible and can deliver more infrastructure. I think it's just government meddling because they want to, basically, because the Labour government introduced 106, and I think SIL is going to leave this borough in a deficit, basically, in the infrastructure. It's more of a statement.
Councillor Peach.
Which Labour government was it introduced it? Because it's certainly been around for 20 or 30 years, hasn't it? Was it Harold Wilson?
Harold Wilson? I don't know which government introduced it.
It's certainly, I mean, it was around in 1990.
Yeah.
So, are you sure it was the Labour government introduced 106?
I don't know. That was just a statement that's come into my head, Mark. So I'll rephrase that. Successive governments have introduced 106, have worked with 106, and this government, this coalition have come along and decided to rip years of history up on no sort of premise of history, basically.
Okay, history lesson over. Councillor Peach, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just want to know if we was to set a zero SIL rate to avoid the development viability. I know there was a question around affordable housing. So we either go SIL rate or reduce affordable housing in order to reintroduce SIL, if I'm understanding this correctly. Are we in the point that, so we kind of have to make a decision whether you reduce affordable housing to get SIL in order to build infrastructure, or build affordable housing and don't get the infrastructure? Is that essentially the sort of crux of it? But the Section 106 is going to pick up all the slack.
I mean, essentially the reason for using Section 106 is it gives you that ability to have a negotiation. If you use SIL, you couldn't negotiate. Your only negotiation tool is affordable housing. So Section 106 gives you flexibility.
And so on the back of that is when you get round the table with the contractors and you're essentially negotiating that Section 106, is there any risk then that we leave ourselves in a situation where they're saying it's not viable if we do all these things, therefore we'll only give you this much as part of a Section 106?
There would always be a negotiation. There would always, and viability will play a part in that, yeah.
Councillor Speen.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think you forgot about me as well, because I did stick my hand up a little while ago. Anyway, thank you. Thanks. This is new to me. I think, as you said, I'm new to this committee, and my understanding is very basic. It's just in relation to this draft instalments policy, and I'm sorry again if this is a really simple question, but what happens if the payments are not made within the schedule that we've set out?
We as a local planning authority start to chase for that money. So I think we've got avenues available to us to chase and secure those funds. So it's the kind of thing we currently do with 106. If we're not receiving the money as and when we should, we've got mechanisms available to us.
So,
Asking whether to get our money, we say, right, you can't build anymore until we've got our dosh.
I assume we are able to use our enforcement powers in that way. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm sure there are some avenues there.
So sorry, essentially we're not opening ourselves up to any more risk or anything by offering these staged payments?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there may be some more administrative processes to have an instalments policy, but in order to ensure that schemes come forward appropriately, we feel it's useful to have that.
Sorry, if there were further administrative costs, is there any way we could recoup?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chairman. The officers have gone and looked at what other authorities are doing, and there isn't national guidance on this, but that's what they feel is what's going across the board with other authorities. And that's what I was asking, because obviously it's not just they haven't just dreamt it up. I'm not saying you suggested that, but.
Just on your last point, you can take 5% from SIL as an admin charge, so you can use that to operate the system.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I want to come in just on the point that's been raised by Councillor Mr. Bean, is that we must never forget that large developers go into receivership. And I think that personally, we should have a default position in that the offer of instalments is at a last resort. You know, these developers, big hitters, they want to develop the site, they want to be taking profit from the site. We've got to ensure and safeguard. It's one of the major risk factors involved, and I'm surprised it's not highlighted as a more severe risk than is being suggested by the officers. But I would like to just sort of do that on the back of the question that's been raised by my colleague. If the officers want to respond, fine, or go away and come back, I don't mind.
Once the development's got the permission, they are legally bound to enter into the payment of SIL, so they have to do it on the various triggers. And as Mark's already said, we would then have to use powers to chase them if they weren't going to pay them. The reason for an instalments policy is for a very large site. For instance, if you ask them to pay for it all up front, they'd have no revenue from the sales of the properties to enable them to provide that money to you. So it gives them an opportunity to get some revenue back in to then be able to fund the rest of the infrastructure and to give you the SIL. So it helps us as well as it helping them, because it's making sure that the money comes to us, but in a logical time frame.
I'm going to put it to the officers because I think it's related to where we're going to move on till now, and this is comments to the portfolio holder on the report. Would it be worthwhile to highlight that particular issue that Councillor Parker and Councillor Spain have mentioned as a form of risk mitigation to the borough within the SIL arrangements? Is that sensible? Can we highlight that particular point?
It's something we can take away and have a look at and then discuss with the portfolio holder.
Right, and members happy with that? That they're going to examine that in terms of risk mitigation? I think it's a very valid point. Yeah. Right, thank you very much. Councillor Parker. Yes, no, go ahead.
Interjection. I want to just first of all try and understand on the this is in specific to comparison and I think it's going into the request from the portfolio holder on Many Down and the golf club. Its report states that Many Down is not viable at 40% affordable housing. Are we giving any suggested figure? First of all, can I ask that question?
What's that? Not from us, no, the policy is 40%. Any other issue about whether it's achievable goes before the Many Down Scrutiny Committee.
Okay, can I then just query, I understand that when we look at the wish list in regard to the inbuilt infrastructure on a relevant site, these have been identified by this authority. In other words, when we look at Many Down, we talk about the provision of, they've got to have a provision, they've got to make a provision of, on section 106, Spine Road, primary schools, bus service, sports facilities. I'm on page 22 of 192 to assist colleagues. 2.10, open space, allotments and library. Then on the golf course site, we're talking of primary school, strategic transport and open space. What I'm trying to get straight is, are we not looking to provide bus services to the golf course sites? Why only allotments on Many Down? And if we are we travelling in a direction that is saying, well, we want sports facilities, we want allotments, and we want library, which I think that reduces the viability for the developer in the assessment, or are we going to have the right proportion of social housing? I don't see why we aren't looking to provide a bus service to the golf course site, and why would we not be also then considering allotments for the golf course site? I'd like to ask why.
The projects listed there in the bullet points obviously are expected to come forward via 106, but if we're feeling that if it gets to that stage and the 40% affordable housing is looking like it may be a problem, then these are the points that we're able to negotiate on. So it may be that the library is replaced by the priority we attach to the 40% affordable housing.
Or something else.
Or something else, yeah. So that's just purely an example, as Councillor Fell's mentioned to me. We drafted this list really so that it gives us the greatest flexibility we can have, and it really reflects the size of the sites we're dealing with. So we're seeing a greater level of infrastructure requirements associated with Many Down compared to the golf course.
Well, I thank you for that response, and gives me considerable confidence, but I'd ask that the portfolio holder with officers consider then making some provision within the report that makes that quite clear, rather than us having to rely on an answer to questions raised at committee, because then that will safeguard the position with regard to 40% affordable housing. In fact, it's what I thought was that the desirability of community facilities, all good as they are, potentially are pushing away our stance on affordable 40% affordable housing. So I would, if there's a paragraph that can be, for this report to go further, I would like to see some sort of paragraph that gives us that understanding, that we can effectively say, well, okay, we may just not be able to at this, because I would assume, I am talking for myself, but I would assume for other committee members, when we talk in terms of what's required from developments in this borough, housing is priority, and particular affordable housing is priority. So I would think the general public would much rather have a house to live in than necessarily an allotment to go, which is all very nice, or a sports facility for some to enjoy and not everybody.
Just comment on that, because we've just got to think about the counterbalance to that. We've said before at this committee that we say what we want, and we don't say, well, if you can't get it, then we'll say what we want, which is a bit less, because we recognise that some might approach it from the lowest common denominator point of view. And that's been said, especially down this end, a number of times. we've said the policy is 40%, we've said this is what the infrastructure is, and I'm a little cautious about introducing a clause that says, but if you can't do that, we'll have a pecking order that says some of it is compromisable. So I'm happy to hear from you to respond to that, because there may be worth picking up on your point, but in a different way. Do you understand what I'm saying, obviously? Yes.
Well, I'm responding to what I believe to be a factual and truthful answer that's been given to us at committee stage by an officer. And if that's what we're expected to rely on in endorsing and noting a report, why can't it be incorporated in the report in some modification? I mean, I'm not good at authoring suggested report wording, but I'm sure if that's effectively, we've just been told this is how it could work in reality, let's have it down there.
Just to say, I think paragraph 2.17 is trying to do that, and maybe we just need to expand upon that. It's just saying that it's at our examination will be important to demonstrate to the inspector that the plan is deliverable, especially the viability issues of Manidown highlighted here. It's considered that flexibility provided by policy CN1, which enables us to negotiate, if required at the time the planning application is determined, that gives us that scope, and we could probably just add something in there to say that section 106 enables us to have a negotiation and prioritise at that particular point in time when an application is before us.
That, I think, gives you the prioritisation hook that you're looking for. And of course, that re-emphasises the flexibility of S106. Right? You happy with that? Yes, thank you. Good. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
I was just going to add that, seeing we're lucky this evening to have both cabinet members in the room, a commitment that we can have from at least one of the cabinet members that we want the 40%. I mean, this is a big issue for many of us, as has been articulated. So I think, understanding everything that's been argued, and don't forget that 217 argues it the other way as well. It argues that you can negotiate away the affordable housing as much as negotiate the section 106. It can be cut both ways, and the inspector will see it as such as well. From our point of view, that 40% is at least, and is a huge red line. And I know we are not the only ones that share that. So again, it's just looking for reassurance and commitment from our cabinet that that is exactly their position, and they share that with us, and we can all go forward together positively, can we not?
If I can make the comment that was in the draft local plan policy that we all approved at council.
Well, Chairman, that's not quite right. I don't remember the Labour group necessarily approving that. But because
no, we
this
wanted,
very issue.
No, to be fair, we wanted 50%. We were very clear on that.
But I do remember Councillor Isaac voting for it, and so did I, and will continue to do so.
Right.
So do we get the commitment or not?
Okay, Councillor Parker. Hope this is contributing now to the report. Exactly, thank you.
As I have done before, yes, I believe. Manidown.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I believe now we're asking to look at the suggested charging tariffs.
Before we go on to that, can I just ask, and you're number one on that list, members, I'm looking at our contributions to the report. We can jump to the charging schedule if you like, but one of these is the provide comments to the portfolio holder in the general report. If we've done that already, I think we've gone through the text of it. Are you happy that we jump to the charging schedule? Okay, fine. Yes, Councillor Parker.
Just one specific question that I have in relation to on page 27, table 3. The proposed rates for non-residential development in the draft charging schedule. I'm trying to understand why we are only looking to levy a charge on budget hotels, and if I can be advised of the logic of that, because I know for certain at other committees we've talked about the desire to attract not just budget hotels to the town. So that's why I'm asking that question.
That comes back to the issue of viability again, and how much how you can deliver a site that's providing a hotel, and the consultants have identified that there's more viability in budget hotels, therefore they're more able to provide a contribution towards SIL. You'll find that higher end hotels have more facilities. They tend to have conference facilities and other things you wouldn't find in budget hotels, which I assume makes them more profitable comparing like for like. All of these issues come back to viability, and it's important to note that policy decisions shouldn't play a role in setting the SIL charge. So if, for example, we wanted to deter out-of-town developments, then it would be unreasonable of us to require a really high SIL charge unreasonably, unless that's supported by evidence.
Was there some other balanced consideration or are you able to balance the considerations or analysis of viability in regard to the actual use that a development would have in relation to the pressure on local facilities? I thought with relation to commercial premises and so forth, industrial units and the like, because certainly a premier hotel, as you suggested, with conferencing centres and so forth, will have maybe a bigger impact on transport and infrastructure.
No, that's not the case at all. It really comes back to how viable the site is and how viable. Yeah.
Councillor Bierman. Sorry. Yes, he's on the list. Multitasking.
Thank you, Chair, and portfolio holder in this case. I'm just wishing, because there will be other situations, I'm sure, but I'm intrigued as to whose judgment it is as to when a hotel is a budget hotel or not. There will be borderlines, and I'm sure an applicant is going to argue they're a budget hotel unless they're wanting to be part of some prestige chain. Is there some way of working that out so that it's definitive rather than being up for the lawyers? Sorry, Councillor Raphael.
I'm sure there will be grey areas to this, and there will be case law that dictates the way we go forward on these matters. But in general terms, with a budget hotel, you won't have a great deal of additional facilities other than a room with an ensuite. When you're going to higher end hotels, you find they have swimming pools, restaurants, conference facilities and the like. So we're able to distinguish between the uses just by what we see on the floor plans that come in with the planning application.
The thing on that down there is, what's it? I've got the name. It's not the. Sorry? That's Premier because it's got a conference facility. Oh, thank you. It used to be Holiday Inn, didn't it? Is it Premier Budget? Well, no, I mean, that's the point. It isn't a budget, is it? Because it holds conferences and things like that there. Yeah, okay. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Musson.
Thanks, Chair. I notice Basingstoke and Tadley at 70, and then I read 3.15. It says that the SIL guidance explains that different rates can be set in relation to different locations, type of development. So does that mean that if we take Tadley, for example, everything in Tadley is going to be 70? Or does it mean that there's a bit of flexibility? And the reason I ask that is because, knowing Tadley quite well, because I live there, there's an enormous diversity in terms of the one end of the town to the other. You only got to look at the council tax banding, for example, to notice that. So having a one-size-fits-all seems a bit odd. And so my question is that really a one-size-fits-all, or is there some flexibility in 3.5? 3.15, sorry.
It's effectively a one-size-fits-all where that development falls within certain geographic zones. I mean, there's only so far we can drill down in terms of detail as to where one zone starts and the other one ends. So we do have to take a sensible approach on that. And whilst one road may have higher values than the adjacent road, we can't always go down and interrogate that, unfortunately.
In that case, I'm a bit puzzled really, because if I look at the difference between Basingstoke town, which is what I think is meant there, and Tadley, That's right, isn't it? Basingstoke Town, yeah. If I look at the facilities that are available in Basingstoke Town, for example, and the facilities that are available in Tadley, it's completely different. And for example, you can walk anywhere you want in Basingstoke to any facility. In Tadley, we've got nothing. You have to catch buses, but half the time there aren't any buses. So I'm puzzled as to how on earth you can say they're the same.
It comes back to viability again, and the house prices in those particular areas. The consultants have undertaken some assessments of sale prices in Basingstoke and Tadley and found them to be broadly comparable. Whereas if you perhaps go to Highclere or somewhere in the A and B, you'll find that prices are significantly higher. So that's the approach they've taken, and it's reflected in the outcomes. It doesn't come back to the level of service provision in that settlement. That's not something that's taken into account.
But forgive me, I thought this was to provide services. So therefore, you would expect it to reflect what services there are or aren't available.
No, it purely comes back to viability and the house prices and land values involved, not the service provision. That's not something that's considered.
Then I have to agree with my colleague over there who said that this is flawed, totally flawed, because I'm sorry, it doesn't reflect the deficit which exists and the massive difference between Basingstoke and Tadley. It doesn't reflect it. It doesn't seem right that the two can have the same. It just doesn't seem at all.
Just to say that what the £70 is saying is that's what development could bear to pay in those locations. So the £70 per square metre is what a development in Tadley and a development in Basingstoke could afford to pay towards infrastructure on the 100 square metres, well, per 100 square metres. It's not saying that it won't fill the deficit. It's just simply saying that that's what that development can bear in terms of a cost to pay towards infrastructure. So it's not taking out of infrastructure, it's what it could actually afford to pay.
And I think we need to remind ourselves that SIL is applicable to the borough, right across the borough. It doesn't actually, it goes where the priorities are determined. Any more for the portfolio holder? Comments on the charging issue, Councillor Harvey?
On page 118, we've got section 4, and in that section it talks about 4.2, no charge for the subdivision of existing dwellings. I've read that sentence twice. I read it earlier today and read one thing into it and read it something different this evening. If we're saying that there will be no charge for the subdivision of existing dwellings unless extra floor space is being created, that's one thing. But I think a subdivision creates a new unit. It goes from 1 to 2. Therefore, in creating a new living unit that is separate from the other, surely SIL should be applicable in that circumstance. And it's legitimate, I think, and if it is legitimate, it would help us deal with a problem by consequence of action that we face in many of our urban areas, and others as well, it's not just us.
So, whilst the impact of having an additional household living in that area may have an impact on infrastructure requirements, SIL is only applicable to an increase in floor area, floor space. So in that situation, it would be exempt.
So how does that work then? You take a house, you subdivide it, you have 2 new units. Those 2 units have also got less floor space than the original one, and you don't apply SIL, but you've got an extra household putting pressure on the community. And for example, in one of our streets, we've got about 20 of these that have come along in quite a short space of time. You wind up with significant pressure on your local services, actually. Doesn't square in my head. Maybe I've misunderstood it.
I think you've understood it, but if there's no increase in floor space, you can't charge SIL. So that's the point.
I introduce you to Alison, who's joined the team. She's brand new to the committee.
You can charge SIL on any new dwelling, except where there's been no new floor space created. And on non-residential development, it's any new development that is greater than 100 square metres. Yes, but because most houses are less than 100 square metres, you can charge it on any new dwelling, except in the case that you just pointed out, subdivision.
So is that legally in the NPPG where it says that
It's in the
subdivision is out?
SIL regulations. Yeah.
So
So if there's an extension on the back of a house and that causes a subdivision of the house, it's still chargeable.
So it's chargeable then.
Presumably, yeah.
Is it extra
I
floor
don't
space? I
follow.
don't think it is. Do you think it's not unexpected?
That's something we can perhaps clarify and come
yeah,
back to members
it's just
on.
this thought that surely if you take a 2-3 bed, you turn it into two 1-beds, the new unit is the creation of new floor space, logically. But obviously if the regulations say something different.
I don't think you can, but we'll confirm.
Yeah.
Councillor Peach, I think, wants to speak on this.
Yeah, just on that point, just so I can understand. You talk about the individual dwelling. So what I'm thinking about here is blocks of flats through change of use. That was an office, is now a block of flats. Would you look at the whole as over 100 square metres or per dwelling?
That's a slightly different process because they go through a process called prior approval rather than a planning application. So in those situations, they would be exempt because the government's given certain exemptions. So that's something we can't control.
Right. Right. There's some very interesting discussions going on here. I'm going to come back to it. Are there...
Can we note as a committee how actually disturbed it? We've got at least 2 developments that we know of, probably more, that are coming forward in exactly that context. So there are going to be significant numbers of flats in the town centre that are going to be outside of SIL and outside of any contribution to the impact on industry.
That's been taken on board by the officer team here. Okay? Committee, are you... It's noted, certainly noted in the minutes, but the officers take note of it. Right. Can we then put the third item on the recommendations of this paper that states right. Item 3, we accept the draft charging schedule as set out in Appendix 4. Is the committee agreed to that? Agreed. Thank you. We've noted some of the reservations and they've been taken on board. That's the important thing. And the draft instalments policy as set out in Appendix 6, so we agreed.
Can I just have one comment?
Certainly.
Just thinking, if given that SIL isn't charged on affordable housing, I'm just thinking now in terms of RSLs who may be developing here, and they're sort of wanting to encourage the affordable housing to be built as soon as possible. But just thinking whether if, you know, in schemes where there are some affordable housing and some for sales, whether that's been taken into account in this instalments policy, because potentially you could have, otherwise you could have the developer RSL building the for sale housing first, just potentially, or you know, so just a something to bear in mind. Yeah, so.
This comes down to the agreement on delivery, does it not, gentlemen? Because, you know, affordable housing, does that come at the end of the delivery because they've collected the SIL first? Can you understand the concern? Officers noted, they'll come back to you on that point, and anything we say come back to you means coming back to the committee, and let us all know what the progress is. Well, through the Secretariat and portfolio holder. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. Endorse the proposals for public consultation on the community infrastructure level draft charging schedule and the draft regulation 123 list and the draft instalments policy. Is the committee happy with that in the report on the consultation? Yes? Thank you very much.
So can I just ask, there's no order of priority?
No, not at all. And where is that?
Well,
Would you like to speak? As Councillor Raffel's referring to something else that will in fact come back to everybody in this room at council.
Yeah, can I just say,
Sure.
I was going to ask that you are content on the basis that I suggested about delegating authority to me for minor changes after the consultation, on the basis that you get the email like we've done with the other thing, the local plan, and if it's something major, then we'll come back and discuss it.
Content?
I mean, you were
Are you content?
And the other thing that I would like is their endorsement on the proposals for how the consultation is conducted, which is the last one.
Yes, I've just done that and agreed it. Yes, that is agreed. We are done. Committee, thank you very much. That was a very constructive session, and it's something vital to us moving forward, in the local plan, and also delivering what we need in the borough. So thank you very much. Slight pause. Let's take a 5-minute break. It's 9 o'clock. Back at 5 past, please. Come for a break. Right, members, we can carry on. Paper D, bit of a sensitive caveat to start with. We have confidential appendices to this document. I don't know if this is the right expression, but they are confidential. They are very, very sensitive. They're provided with this report because the report in itself is not complete without them. And as part of the update, as requested to come before this committee, that's why you have got the pink papers. So hopefully everybody who wanted, in a minute, Councillor James, in the update is in front of you, and that was what was requested. If you want to discuss anything in the white papers, yes, Councillor James, in a minute, please. Then you're free to do so, of the white papers. Hopefully we don't need to go into the pink papers. I would also request that all councillors please put your pink papers on the table when you leave, so we can account for them. They are that sensitive. So you've got the information, but I would ask you to leave them on the table. They will be put into the destruction bins by the committee services. If you need access in the future, you're quite happy to come into the council and peruse them here. As a request. That's all I have to say. Have you got anything to say, Councillor Isaac? Yes, Councillor James.
I would like to discuss the pink papers.
Is it really necessary? And when do you want to discuss them? No, it's your decision. You just call for it. When do you want to discuss them? I need to know to be able to move
Chair,
this.
your tone tonight is just so aggressive with me. Please be careful how you please don't talk like
I'm
that.
trying to move this
I
committee
don't mind
onwards,
when we
Councillor
discuss
James.
it, but what I'm saying to you, Chair, I would like to discuss the pink papers. I don't mind when we do it, but please, Chair, don't talk to me in that manner.
I'm sorry you don't like my tone. I'm afraid probably I talk to everybody like this. I'm just trying to move on. I need to know because I have to close this meeting into confidential session. That's the only reason, and you've been here long enough to know that that is what I have to do.
Chair, can I move it at the end of the white paper and then we can sort of have that as
Certainly, Councillor Behrman, that's a constructive suggestion. So we will do it that way. We'll take it in two halves. Is that acceptable to the committee? Yes, thank you. Councillor Isaac.
Thank you, Chair. The background to this is that this report concerns the publicly owned site at Aldermaston Road Triangle, which in May of last year, Cabinet took a decision should be taken to the market in accordance with a development brief that had been shared with councillors, including the then EPH committee. And so the task that I was given as portfolio holder alongside the head of resources was to take the site to the market and to seek to sell it. And that was what that's what's been happening since that decision was taken last year. There wasn't a requirement to bring it back to committee, but there was, as you know, a request from certain members of this committee to have an update on the progress. And so in the spirit of cooperation, which is always, I hope, manifesting what I seek to do, I have gone further than that, than providing you with just an update. I thought, well, actually, I'll share the report with you, but I do just want to emphasise the point that the chairman has made. This is very commercially sensitive, and a lot of work's gone into this. We do not want to put a foot wrong here and find that what we want to do, which is actually something that's for the good of the borough, I think, in terms of delivering new homes on this site, and we don't want to upset that in any way.
Right. White papers. There is an update. Are there any comments? I don't know quite what to request. So questions or comment? Questions? Comment? Yeah. Councillor Beam?
Chair, I hope I'm not going to sound too silly because I haven't, as I said earlier, seen these papers before, and since I can only single task, I couldn't read them whilst the other debates were going on. But it's always been an issue that when we as a borough have our own land for development, potentially, that when we dispose of it, that we enforce the highest standards of sustainability. Now, I don't know whether, from a brief note elsewhere, I note that this is in the pink papers, but I don't think it in any way offends, that we've asked for a certain minimum level. That certain minimum level seems quite low to me, and we should be doing on our own land the highest of standards in sustainability and taking that opportunity to drive sustainability in the borough upwards. And from what I've seen, and it's only a very quick glance, we don't seem to be doing that.
Well, that's covered in section 3.9 of the report. You see that dwellings should be constructed at minimum level 3, and that, in a planning sense, is our sort of minimum standard within the borough, and that's what we've gone with. If you're asking, did we increase this to a much higher level than the minimum, the answer is no. That wasn't in the development brief. That wasn't what was required. If we did do so, it would increase. It would impact value significantly.
Well, this is a debate we had quite a long time ago, and I'm just trying to think what the site was. It might have been the famous Lily site or something, but we certainly had a long debate about. Oh no, it wasn't. It was the Gresley Road. Pardon? Yes, and we have not. We discussed that the balance between getting good sustainable development and raising the most cash. Now, yes, we do want to raise cash. I personally, and I'm not alone in that because I've read many reports that endorse this view, doesn't mean that the cheapest type of construction will raise the most money. If one is putting a higher demand on it and raising the standards of sustainability, you can usually demand more from the purchasers. So we're not necessarily going to lose money on it. But to say that when it's our own land, we're only going to set the same standards as we do for every Tom, Dick and Harry developer, I think just isn't good enough. We should, for our own development, and all the seminars I have been to on this topic say that's the best opportunity to raise sustainability standards. That's when you want to do it, when you've got your own land. And if we're not doing it here, I am massively disappointed, and I think it's a poor show on our part.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Beerman. A point taken. That the development brief was circulated at the time to councillors, firstly, and secondly, I acknowledge what you say. It would have impacted, I think, on value, and if we now seek to unwind this, we will find that that we have to start all over again on this. Yeah.
May I come back then? Just one last comment. I hear what the portfolio holder says, and I suspect there might not be enough will, and probably I understand that even, but it happens each time that we say, oh, it's too late to change it. If, however, and we have a sheet here for the future work programme, stick an item on there for this overview committee to decide that when we are disposing of our own land, we will set certain standards and we won't do less, so that one doesn't have to. I don't know whether I was circulated with the development brief and the opportunity to comment on it, if it went to all members or not. If it did, I didn't spot it. And it shouldn't be dependent on individual councillors spotting something possibly coming out in an email. It should be a fundamental rule, and we should be setting that so that the portfolio holders in future know that they don't even try going out without it meeting the standards that we've set.
Yeah, I'm perfectly. I'm sure that if the committee wishes to do that, then it's entitled to do that in terms of looking at future policy. The development brief was circulated to the Ofcom at the time. And what I think we also have to bear in mind here is that we are looking at what I'm sure will if we proceed, turn out to be a first-class development.
Without preempting anything else, did I overhear that you sent it to the ward councillors as well?
Oh, in essence, it was the brief went out to. It was requested as the members of the committee, the EPP committee, as was at the time, asked to see a copy of the brief. Went to the ward members and the adjoining ward members at the request of the ward member herself.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Nothing else on the white papers, Councillor Parker?
Just a request again, and for future reference, but I think probably I've mentioned this in almost every meeting. Can we not live in grey land in regard to when we're looking at possible sort of how places are going to look and maps and so forth, rather than having to assess where somebody is in a lighter shade of grey or a darker shade of grey? You know, I understand that we all want to save money and we all want to work on a tight budget, but maybe for purposes of better understanding of what's being looked at, we might just be able to afford to, for the committee members at least, colour copy of maps and artists' impressions and the like for us.
Thank you, Councillor Parker, and that's been taken on board by Mr. Bovis for future reference. Councillor Peach.
Yeah, just to make a positive comment on here, putting the development aside, the impacts it will have on that junction there, I think, will be very welcome, because that at the minute, at the top of the pointiest bit of the triangle, that is that bit there. Yeah, at the minute where it's very, very dangerous to turn out. That'd be very welcome. Thank you.
Councillor Must.
Just a question for clarification. When I read through the pink and the white, I drove past it tonight. I know the triangle fairly well. I think we all do. But in somewhere in all of this, I got the impression there was a little bit on the pointed end of the triangle that was being developed as well. Is that, did I read that right, or is that just shown because somebody else is developing that?
If you look in the pack of plans, it gives you an indication of the land that's being developed and also the land that's being held back for facilitating the road junction improvements. So I think you can see that on that one. So basically, so the land that's being developed is reduced by due to the fact we kept some land back to facilitate that road improvement, which is something we all support.
Right, do I understand it that any more discussion is going to be on the pink papers? Fine, we're going to move into confidential session. We need to check that the webcast is switched off. And I'll, for the formality and the record, pursuant to the section 100, brackets A, brackets 4, of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be disclosed, as defined in the appropriate paragraph, section 12A of the Act. The webcast will be turned off, turned back on to close the meeting once the discussion is complete. There's no members of the press or the public present. It's dark down there. Can you confirm that? So nobody will be asked to come back in, and Stefan is now confirming that the webcast is off. Right, members, back into public session. First of all, something slipped my mind at the end of the discussion on the SIL about Andrew Hunter. And that was the last, as I understand it, the last attendance at this committee meeting. And I was going to ask the committee if we could send our thanks to him for all the work he's done within Basingstoke and Dean. He's moving just up the road to Bracknell, and in fact his, I think it's a temporary replacement at the moment, was present in the committee meeting this evening. To get away from my omission, and I will send my own personal apology to Andrew, I would also like to send a message on behalf of the committee to him for his assistance during his time here, certainly with the preparation of the local plan. We've put an awful lot on him. He's put a bit of work on us as well, so it goes both ways. But if you're happy, committee, that allow me to take care of that, and I will send him the very best for the future. Okay? It is being put into the minutes. Absolutely. It will go on the record. Okay? Right, move on to paper E. If you've got that. You've also been distributed a revised work program. Now, all three chairs met last Monday. We're doing this on a fairly frequent basis because the works, as you can probably imagine, and some of you are on other committees as well, there's not a conflict so much. We just don't want to make sure that we can be as efficient in the committee process as possible. We don't want to really overlap too much. Now, there was a mention that SIL might come back to us in October. So I'm working off the paper that was put in front of you today, not the one on paper E. Now, have you got any comment to make on this, Stefan? Yes. We touched on homelessness at the scrutiny committee the other night, and this was in concert with the chair of scrutiny and with both Councillor Golding and myself, and with committee services and with Laura Taylor. Homelessness has come off this because it's all being worked around, and I know what Councillor Harvey and I sort of bounced around the other night. The COG is rather important to the scrutiny committee. We need the outcome of the COG to go through a process. And at the moment, we don't have the assurance of when that's going to take place. We've got to work on something. So we've put homelessness into a to be scheduled slot at the moment. Yes, Councillor.
I saw the COG on homelessness, and what I would like to put back that has been taken off, and they're not looking at that because they told us they weren't looking at that, is and it's that we sent you a list at the start of this process. I think you didn't hand them out to everyone, but we had a list of the things that we'd like to be included. And the one that I'd like to include there in relation to homelessness is that the committee believes it would be appropriate and necessary to conduct a review of the council's housing strategy to account for the implications and cuts to the Supporting People programme. And so the homeless COG isn't looking at the impact of supporting people. So what I'd like us to do is to look at the housing strategy and look at what is the implications on the strategy as a result of the cuts to supporting people. That's one of the things that we sent to you, Chair.
Right, we've got in October, we've got housing allocations, which is part of it.
No.
Well, then, okay. I'll tell you that
housing allocation is a policy.
That's what this committee deals with.
Yeah, but what I'd like to look at as part of the work programme is the housing strategy and review the housing strategy. We're required to review the housing strategy and what is the impact, because in the housing strategy we have at the moment, it makes reference to supporting people and what we're delivering through supporting people. And as that funding isn't there anymore, we need to look at what the implications is on our strategy. So I'd like us to review the strategy and the impact of those cuts.
Right, if that's the case, the first opportunity, because we've got other things set in stone here, things are rolling, and this is the way that we draft these work programs in the committees now. What we need is a scoping group from this committee. I've attended 2 scoping groups at the moment, and we find that 3 people representative across the committee, it tends to be fairly useful. I'll look at Councillor Harvey, because the one that we kicked off with I thought was very good. And it's down to the housing allocations, was it not? What do we... It's the housing one. Yeah, everything's related, but we've got to really focus on what we can achieve in the committee. Now, if it's a review of the housing strategy, then we need 3 heads. I would suggest 3, could be 4, but it shouldn't grow much more than 4. We get into a scoping group, and it's a brain dump of what exactly the committee will do. If you like, looking at timings, what can we achieve in the committee under debate, and formulating a review of the strategy in about an hour to an hour and a half. We have to look forward. We've got available time in November, and we've got, at the moment, an available time in January. So, anybody like to volunteer for a scoping group? So, is it the wish of the committee to examine the housing strategy? It's not because we have space, but I think I would like to check on what kind of periodicity we have to review the housing strategy on. But I think there's so many items coming up concerned with housing, it's probably a very good idea. You happy with this, guys? Yep, okay. Supporting people, homelessness, housing allocation, it's all part of the same thing.
I think you can't make it too broad because it's a massive piece of work.
Which is the point of the scoping group.
And so what I'm saying is we've had substantial cuts to our programme of supporting people, which will have an impact on our housing strategy and our homeless strategy. So what we need to do is look at that.
Look at what? Can you be more precise,
Look at
please?
the housing strategy and our homeless strategy, and look at what it is that we were funding, and we need to review that. And that's the piece of work we need to do.
I'm not going to have the scoping group start talking in here. So could I ask that you come on to the scoping group, Councillor Mrs. James? You obviously know what you're doing. Councillor Peach, would you like to join? I'm looking at people with some expertise in these fields, because we've really got to narrow it down. What's your time availability? Any chance during the day? Okay, you can't do daytime, so an early evening scoping meeting might work. Anybody else like to join us? Councillor Harvey, Councillor Ms. James, Councillor Peach, anybody else? Councillor Behrman? I'm not on this committee anyway. Oh, you're a reserve, are you not? You're a reserve? Yeah. Reserves can go on the scoping groups. Okay, because this is what we're trying to do, is get involvement. Anybody else? No? We'll start off with that. We've got 3. This will be scheduled through committee services. They will facilitate it. And we've got our scoping pro forma, and it allows us to do a bit of we've done about an hour and a half, and allows you to focus in on exactly what the committee is going to be looking at. So, again, you touched on 2 words, you see, homelessness. If you want to divide homelessness up into many things, all we're looking at as far as targeting the committee is concerned is that the COG is looking at homelessness. You can say, well, it's not that bit of homelessness. Then the name's wrong. It's too broad. Just as you said, Councillor Mrs. James, we need to come down to the specifics.
I totally agree, and I have real concerns about the COG, absolute concerns. And I sat on it and I was dismayed when I went there. But in relation to this piece of work, clearly it was asked, and it is not picking up this piece of work. So, and I think it's an essential piece of work we look at.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at yes, Councillor Harvey. You will be approached by committee services. Right then, But let's go through what we've got covered today. 9th of October, we're going to have the housing allocations coming before this committee. It's a report to the policy committee. Will notify members of the outcome following broad consultation with a range of stakeholders. You can read it for yourself. Councillor Musson.
I was going to make another suggestion on something to add to the work programme when ready.
Oh, fine. I'll ask for any inputs to come in a second, if I may. Thank you. Looking at the Rural Economy Fund, that's a pre-cabinet update. It's coming before the committee. An SPD under planning obligations, that will be presented to us. Now, business incubation in Basingstoke. Anybody understand what that is? It's a cabinet decision. Do you know the subject? It's to do with 5 universities. It's called Set Squared, is the facilitator. It's an internationally known company, all over Europe, US, Far East, I believe, as well. And it's to do with the establishment of an incubator. A business startup is what it's all about. And it's being supported by 5 universities. I'll get this wrong, but Councillor Harvey will put me straight. Bath, Southampton, Guildford, it's only Guildford, Reading, and Exeter. Thank you. It's the one down the southwest. Well,
there's been that many universities that have been part of this project over about 12, 15 years. It's just something else.
Well, there we go. Anyway, it's an initiative that's coming forward. It will come to this committee on the 9th of October. Right. We've now identified housing strategy. What we do is we do the scoping meeting first, then we see what the implications are of the work to come forward to the committee, then we timetable it. It could be that there's not enough evidence at the scoping meeting as we did on CEP. Do we need to call people in? Do we need to go outside of the council offices? The scoping groups have got a wide remit, and these committees have a wide remit now, and we're slowly developing them. It's a process, but we're actually getting there. Stakeholders can be brought into the smaller groups because we find we're much more effective that way before they come into committee. So we've got that one noted. Councillor Harvey, next for possible subjects coming before the committee.
Thank you, Chair. The Scrutiny Committee has agreed to, at its next meeting, to look and to begin to look at the issues associated with the lack of delivery of affordable housing. And it's a retrospective examination of what the problems are. And what officers have highlighted that nobody has done yet and is relevant to the budget and it's relevant to future policy is what delivery mechanisms this authority may look to. So this isn't a piece of retrospective stuff, that's what Scrutiny is doing, which is a massive piece of the puzzle. To complement that, and would be very complementary to that as far as our regeneration team is concerned, as far as our housing team is concerned, it would be, I think, useful for us, very useful for us, to examine what policy could be created around delivery mechanisms in the future. There are many examples out there of other authorities using, companies they're establishing with partners, preferred partners, and so on and so on. That would be the subject of the examination. The budget has earmarked roughly 25 million to consider for future investment as part of this whole programme. And again, the officers are looking for input and direction and for members to build out of that. So the focus would be on that. It wouldn't be the retrospective bit. That's what Scrutiny are doing. Scrutiny are looking at what the problems are. We would need to look forward as to, okay, what are some of the solutions that would fall out of that? Scrutiny have scheduled it for its next meeting in November. So logically, if we look to where you're going with your schedule, it would be good to have that on the agenda, but we would need to influence it before the budget. There would need to be something in there so that Cabinet could hold on to it going through what would be a February budget, if you think about it. So I presume you'd be looking at Christmas time or needing it around Christmas to have some sort of at least initial debate on the issues involved or scoping of it out.
Yeah, I heard every word you said. What I'm trying to do is figure out a date, whether the 15th of January is too late, because the budget goes to council in February. I'm just wondering, we're not overtaking anything if we pencil in the 13th of November on, that's what I'm wondering.
Both pieces of work actually would time quite nicely.
Okay, so we've got a couple of weeks between the two.
and both pieces of work are separate, but they would dovetail quite
Yeah,
nicely.
and that's exactly what we examine when the chairs get together. We see how this work does dovetail together.
With the publishing of agendas, you need that 7.
Oh yeah, I understand. But we're not.
Prepared after scrutiny.
Okay. Take a bit of managing, but I think we can get it in on the 13th of November. Scoping group. You're going to get these demands. That's the way it works. Yeah. Councillor Harvey. If the scoping groups don't meet, we don't get the work done. We've got to identify what the outcomes are. You know, I think one of the objectives here is that we're doing productive work within the committees. Tonight was a very good example. We actually got somewhere. And so did CEP the other day. You'd like to go on? Okay. Councillor Mr. James.
Yeah, I'm up for doing it, but because I think it's relevant, highly relevant. But at the same token, if we're going to have so many meetings, why don't we just have one meeting on the same night and scope these things out?
No, you can't do it because, excuse me, Stephen, but if you need assistance for any stakeholders outside of the borough walls, if you like, or you need an input from officers, not specifically a report, but a briefing paper, you've got to have time between the, first of all, you've got to develop the outcome. What do you want out of this? Oh, you want two?
Exactly.
All right.
Scope on the same night, because I'd rather have one.
Look out for a 3-hour session.
Well, that's fine. I'd rather have that than two. It just makes it more difficult.
Scoping for the entire committee on the next agenda.
Not for the time. Yeah. No, the same 3 people. No,
Same 3 people.
same 3 people. Okay, if you guys are up for it. And okay, committee services will do that, and I think Councillor. What's the earliest you can make, Councillor Mr. James? If you can make 6 o'clock. 6. Okay, captured that. Anything else? Now, it's not. This is not the only source of input into the committee. We've got the COGs, whether they're good, bad, or whatever. It's the outcomes of the COGs will need to be adjusted. Scrutiny and council will also fire things our way, but at least this is something the committee wants to see, and then we can program the other things around it. Everybody happy? I will take away the action. Sorry? Oh, Councillor Must.
On the scrutiny committee, I recall that we had a presentation from Councillor Raffel, who I think has commissioned Peter Lerner to go through planning. I don't understand what's happening with that when he's finished. Is that going to come to a meeting, and if so, will it be this meeting or another meeting? So in other words, when he comes up with proposals, that has to be put into a plan. Does that come before this committee or another one? And if it's coming before this one, when might that be?
I can't give you the answer to the last bit of your question. We would have to. There would have to be an examination of what the outcome of that investigation is. Now, if it's decided that this committee is best equipped to look at it, then we will get an input either from the cabinet member, because they can address things to the committee for deliberation. I'm afraid my crystal ball is not clear, but thank you for raising the point. Yep. Can you make a note of that? Okay, Stefan's going to make a note of that. Stephen?
One very quick comment for possible work might be off the back of what Councillor Bierman was talking about earlier with regards to environmental homes moving forward.
Sustainable,
environmental, green, all of those. Basically, what I'm thinking is maybe there's a bit of work that we can scope that out as well and try and work out how is are there ways that we could better influence tenders and bids coming in to ensure we get of a higher standard? Just for example, one consideration might be a competition perhaps with bidders to say to them, right, this is what we want, this is what we're expecting. Come forward.
I think that was very evident coming out of the discussions over this last one. It's all the lessons learned fixture. Mr. Jones, Councillor Jones.
Picking up on that, it actually would be a really good piece of work, is because we are coming from it from a different perspective, but now we are, as you said, Chair, our title is something quite different, that we look at tendering, you know, what we want from a tendering document, and review the tendering document and the process in relation to best consideration, really.
I think that kind of discussion, those kind of words, in fact, will lead you to, it's almost like a mini policy, isn't it? That would exist as far as this borough is concerned, of the quality of what we want to come out of these tendering documents. But yeah, exactly right.
Policy and a process to achieve that.
Yes, yeah. I think the borough is constrained to some degree about process when it comes to tendering. Local government is, so is central government. Yes.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, I'm sorry, just to continue with that, obviously one has to fulfill the legal tendering process, but the process internally in deciding what one's looking for isn't part of the legal tendering process requirement. We can set that down and then go through the tendering process, as I see it.
Which is why I mentioned, as an aside, look at the title of this committee. We will see it, not EPP, in the old regime. This committee looks at all that and would have seen that document, if you like, before it went out to tender. But I think it would be of benefit to us, the borough and the residents, if we had that written down. As I said, I don't know if it's a policy or protocol or whatever word you want to put to it, but I think it's worth discussing within the committee.
Picking up the 2 points, Councillor Peach is right in terms of where we stand on the green agenda on the basis of the planning side. Then there is the overlap with where we are, as what you just described yourself, and Councillor Beerman and Councillor Jones. The context of it is where we are on policy, but, and this is the important point from a financial point of view, we've got the green reserve, we've got all the debate that's taking place around what this council might do on its own land with its own resources and our well-being powers. So if we have a scoping exercise on it, it should be around what this authority can do. It picks up Councillor Peach's point and the other points, and it's around what this council can achieve. If that's our focus, rather than going off on it's what this council, we can use the legal powers in the Localism Act, because we now have a legal right, where we didn't have before, to do things beyond our remit in the wellbeing powers, which would fit perfectly, absolutely perfectly, with a nice agenda. That would be a good agenda to look at in that respect, if that was the focus of it.
Right, I think we've got enough work to keep us busy for a bit. I'd be interested, once we get this scoping group going, I think a lot of that's going to fall out of it. And can we then review it once we've got established the 2 scoping documents? And we'll make a note that the green agenda, if you will, is next on the list, if you will. And I think those 2 scoping sessions and the committee sessions will actually lend some strength to what we want to really have as an outcome in the process. Any more contributions? No? Okay, thank you very much. It's a bit later than we hoped to, but very satisfactory evening. Thank you very much, members.